Retro Hangover, supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We'd especially like to thank patrons Lyle McCarnes, Ashton Ruby, Randall Quiggle, Tony G, Studstill Smash the Milkman, Raging Demon, Katie Quigg, JC, Megan Caruso, Mast Keaton, Andrew Liguori, Ozzy Garcia, The Retro Vixen, Adam from The Good, the Bad, the Backlog, Lunchbox, aka The Disgruntled Gamer, Diskai Mara, Jenny E, Rick Firestone, Parallax Puddles, Soha, Dave Jackson, Matt, aka Stormageddon, Retro Overdrive, Van Fernal, Keith Gasper, Eric Guess, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Event, Alan Bingham, Storm Beagle, Ryan Player 1, Mike the Ref from Backbreaker Gaming, B. Ross from Super Garbage Day, Darth Emick, Low5 Alex, and Alt. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the most recent episode of Retro Hangover.
And hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we frantically finish Fraggles, finessing, figuring faux fidgets for finality. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with special guest Rick Firestone from Pixel Project Radio. And, as always, your host, Shane, son of a dick submariner dragon! Ski.
I think that was you coming back. I honestly could not tell. I heard a eat,
Probably.
and that was it. All right. Anyway,
I know I go to space, I come back.
you do, yes. I feel like this might be the first instance of a subaquatic dick dragon. I'm not sure. It feels like it though. We might be breaking new ground here.
Subaquatic professional dick dragon.
Ooh. Okay. I mean, was it like an amateur dick dragon before?
Well, I mean, a submariner is a professional person in a submarine in
Ah,
the Navy.
I see. Okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So they get paid to go underwater, and that is a fitting insult, I guess, from a certain clown jester bad guy. But I one of my favorite insults from this game. Oh man, I can't wait to talk about this game. I think we already know whether this game holds up today. I'm thinking we're just going to get out of their way because I'm just excited to talk about it, which is Final Fantasy VI. And you know what? Welcome. First of all, welcome to the show, Rick Firestone. This is the first time on the show. So excited to have you here. And I think this is the most appropriate episode I could see you being on a retro hangover, all things considered, which we'll get into in a minute. But welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Whenever you mentioned that this was an upcoming episode and you asked me on, I jumped at it. I really like this game. I can't wait to talk about it.
It feels like we've talked about this before. Oh, yes, we have. If you like what you hear from us, well, what you should if you're listening to this, unless it's your first time. Well, thank you.
Wow. Not putting any pressure on them or anything. Jeez.
I know. Or you're coming from Rick's show. Myself and Rick did about 8 hours of talking some Final Fantasy VI, just going beat for beat for the story mode. I had a great time on that. I've seen tremendous reception.
Why am I even here then? You know what? I'm going to go get a coffee. I'll be right back.
But sorry, Shane. But yeah, this is the RHP one. It's not going to be 8 hours. It's probably going to be a BV episode, but we're not going to do 8 hours. We promise. Before we talk about our game du jour, the Final Fantasy 6/3, if you will, we are going to talk about the games that we have been playing as we are wont to do. And as we are also wont to do, we start off with our guest. So, Rick, what games have you been playing lately?
Oh boy, I've got too many going at once right now, which I always try to not do this, and it always happens. Right now, for the review crew in the Retro Hangover Discord, I am playing through Lisa the Painful, which, I mean, by the time this comes out, Lisa will probably have already come and gone. So I'll just say it's one of my favorite games of all time, easily in my top 5. Love that game to death, and it's been a blast revisiting it. Final Fantasy, speaking of, I am playing through Final Fantasy 13 for an upcoming thing on my show, approaching it in good faith. I do not have any real preconceived notions. I'm giving it a really solid and honest chance. That should be fun. What else? Super Mario RPG, going through that. Delightful little game.
The new or old Super Mario RPG?
So, man, I debated which one I should do because I have never played it before. But after talking to so many of you all, the consensus seems to be that the remake is as one-to-one as you could possibly get. So I'm just doing it like that on the old Switch.
Good.
And last but not least, I have been playing some Street Fighter 6. Shout out to Raging Demon. I am getting back into my love of fighting games, and I have been learning how to get good.
Fighting games. I know that's Shane's favorite genre, and I can't wait to return to some of those games as well, because Shane loves talking about fighting games, don't you, Shane?
I am, man, I literally cannot express how excited I am for that.
I know you can't even, but I can odd. But before we talk about how odd I am, what games have you been playing? And by the way, great lineup, and I do think Super Mario RPG is 1-to-1. Why am I just skipping to Shane? I should talk about what you've been playing because they're interesting here. I'm just like, yeah, Rick, thanks. Bye. I am also looking forward to playing Lisa the Painful, and it seems like this is going to be another divisive game. I don't know yet. I'm kind of anxious. I'm very anxious from the descriptions that you all have been giving us. But Street Fighter 6, that's another one. I mean, I haven't gotten into fighting games. Is this a good game to get back into fighting games?
So, it's funny. I haven't played another Street Fighter since EX2 Plus on the PS1. It has been that long. I just haven't picked up Street Fighter. As far as getting back into fighting games, I mean, I think so. They've got a modern control layout if you choose to use it. Like if you don't want to do all the half circles and quarter circles, which you should, because come on, we're all adults here. I'm just kidding. Accessibility is good. But you can do it either way. It's really approachable. The training and tutorials they have are so thorough. It's some of the best I've ever seen in any fighting game. I think like Street Fighter 6 or Tekken 8, like you can't go wrong, man. You really can't.
Oh yeah, and well, I say oh yeah, like I've played it, but that's what I've been hearing, especially from a friend of the show, patron of the show, Raging Demon, who's been hyping up Tekken 8 to no end, and just a big year for fighting games. I guess Mortal Kombat 1 has kind of fallen off, but since I'm not playing fighting games, I would know, and I haven't played a Mortal Kombat since 3, maybe. But I just don't hear anything from that anymore. Tekken 8 seems to be on fire. It's just you're eating good right now if you're a fighting game fan. Very, very, very well. It's incredible.
Oh yeah, it's a great time. And by the way, I am really excited to hear what you think of Lisa once you get there. If you have the capacity, like in your bandwidth to get there, I think you are going to love it. That's just my take, knowing your sense of humor, especially. I think you're going to love it.
Looking forward to it. I've been looking forward to playing this game for quite some time. So hopefully I'll have something to say about it on our next episode if I can find that time. I've all done this to myself. I think that's actually a good segue. Thank you, Rick, for me talking about myself. You don't really go last here, but I'll let Shane take the caboose on this one. For myself,
yes,
he likes a nice thick caboose.
I do. I cannot lie.
Not gonna say it.
You'll get there eventually.
Yeah. I'm thinking something in my head, and I'm just like, it happened to be a little too on the nose. I've been playing a couple games myself. I've been trying to get through the game Bug for the Sega Saturn. It's holding me up from making progress because I'm telling myself I can beat this game. I can make it through this game. And it's one of those games where I'm like, I don't think this is bad, but I also don't want to play it, but I don't want to stop playing it. I am thankful that I have an action replay and I have infinite lives, because if I didn't, I probably would have a broken Saturn and I would not be able to play any more Saturn games, because this game pisses me off to no end in so many ways. But it's also not like a bad thing, because it does save your progress. You can start at the beginning of a level, but these levels are massive and require some exploration and really at the end of the day, some memorization in order to get through it. Rick, I know you've played Bug. I think you know what I'm talking about. But like the further you get in that game, the game just likes to fuck with you. Essentially, it just says, die. We're going to kill you until you figure this out. Very, very good old school gameplay in that aspect. So Dave Jackson, friend of the show, you would hate this. I hope you play it someday. But yeah, that's the kind of game that Bug is. I'm trying to make it through it so I can continue on my little Saturn project, which I think I'll formally announce to everybody next episode when I'm doing there. Like, again, the patrons know if you're in our Discord, but if you're just a listener to the show on this main feed, you might not know yet. So I'll formally announce what I'm doing next episode. I'm also playing Xenosaga, which I guess I'm going to decide to keep my thoughts to myself on that, because a spoiler, if you listen to Pixel Project Radio with Rick, I'll be talking about Xenosaga over there pretty soon. Not soon, but soon enough. So if you want to hear about my thoughts on Xenosaga, just go over and subscribe to Pixel Project Radio, and you'll hear my thoughts there. Really looking forward to talking about that in a lot of different aspects. And finally, I am playing some more Valkyrie Profile, trying to make my way through that game. It's a lot of fun until it's not. It's getting pretty repetitive. Has some issues, but I know that game is something that picks up later, and there are some rewarding elements. I'm fairly still early. I'm pacing myself for reasons. So again, like I have multiple games going on, multiple layers of things I'm trying to accomplish. Yeah, busy, trying to stay busy, and hopefully I get that Bug stuff done. Hopefully I get Xenosaga done. And then I can move on to Lisa the Painful and either rage and pull my eyeballs out, or just find it delightful. One of the two. I'm looking forward to something. But Shane, how about yourself? What have you been playing?
Honestly, I don't really have a whole lot going on right now. My life is pretty much just ARPGs, which is entirely not surprising if you know me
No,
at
not
all.
at all.
Speaking of eating good, I gotta say right now, pretty good time to be an action RPG fan, particularly because of the release of Last Epoch. It's pretty good, in case you haven't heard. I am thoroughly enjoying it so far. I have not put as much time into it as I would like, but it's a good counterpart for Diablo 4, because I was actually just having this conversation with somebody today that I realize that to a certain degree, I am still a Diablo apologist, in that I want to believe that it's going to get better. And for the record, I mean, I've been enjoying my time with D4, like unironically. Like I do enjoy the game. I'm not so deep into like the end game stuff that the issues that it has bothers me so much necessarily. I think the biggest thing is really just the itemization is awful. It's actual hot trash. The fact that you have to sift through like 40 different possible affixes for like very specific scenarios. Like you do X% more damage when enemies are close. We're not going to tell you exactly what close means, but fucking figure it out. It's unnecessary. It's like, well, it's not like, the game was designed by people who have never played action RPGs, and it shows. So there are definitely some inherent mechanical issues, but overall I've enjoyed my time with it so far. Honestly, I think it's riding a lot on just that Blizzard polish. It doesn't matter what other game I play, Last Epoch or PoE, anything else, like they don't have that same gameplay feel that Blizzard manages to pull off, and I think that takes the game a long way, probably further than maybe it deserves. But at any rate, yeah, lately most of my time has been in Last Epoch, and I have been very much enjoying that. I'm rolling with a a zookeeper necromancer. I'm trying to have as many minions as possible and just have them do my evil bidding. And so far, it's been turning out pretty well.
Necros are best tros.
True facts.
I don't even know what best tros means. It just rhymes. So
I don't care. I'll take it. I accept it.
Oh, yeah. I'm rolling with it because why not? I'm tired. I don't know why I'm tired. I know the listener. You don't care that I'm tired because probably when you're listening to this, I'm not tired. Unless you're Australian.
They're like,
I'm probably
we
tired.
don't care. Talk more, game monkey.
Yes. I think I'm about to talk more. Don't you think so, Shane?
Yes, I do. I'm going to be honest. I was like half kidding about going and getting a coffee. I think you two can probably carry this episode yourselves. But, I'll be here for moral support. So there you go. But yes, I do believe Chris has some things to talk about, specifically around a certain Final Fantasy game, 3 or 6, depending on where you were at a certain time. And we do have a little bit of brief history, as we are wont to do. So, Chris, would you please give the fine people at home some of that historical information about Final Fantasy VI?
Final Fantasy. By this point, I think you all know that this is a popular franchise on this podcast, especially for me. So, excuse us if we don't open with a slightly overdramatic setup as we are wont to do for our brief history. We have tapped that well for what is probably the most popular series in the JRPG genre. But if any game were to deserve it off of its reputation among its community, perhaps today's game, Final Fantasy VI, would be worthy of it. Considered by many to be not only the best RPG on the Super Nintendo, but also the best of all time, Final Fantasy VI is thought as perhaps the premier game of the genre, next to Chrono Trigger prior to the days of the PS1. So, how, briefly, did this game come to be? Development would begin after the release of Final Fantasy V, which was arguably the watershed entry in the series in terms of popularity for the Japanese audience, in December of 1992. Hironobu Sakaguchi, who had led the series into prominence, had to take a few steps back in his role in the series as he had received more responsibility at Square since taking the role of executive vice president. Sakaguchi would split director duties between himself and other members of Square's staff. This would be Yoshinori Kitase, who was an event and field planner for Final Fantasy V, and Hiroyuki Ito, who was the creator of the active time battle system in Final Fantasy IV. Approach the game's story with the premise that every character could conceivably be the protagonist, with all members being able to contribute ideas towards character development and arcs. Of course, other series regulars who helped establish Final Fantasy's identity would return. Yoshitaka Amano would come back for character designer and art direction, and Nobuo Uematsu would pen the score. On April 2nd, 1994, Final Fantasy VI was released in Japan. Predictably, it was a smash hit. Japanese magazine Famitsu gave the game a 37 out of 40, and the market also received it favorably, with it selling 2.6 million copies within its first year. Square skipping on the release of Final Fantasy V and RPGs still being a niche genre, they would decide to localize Final Fantasy VI for North American audiences. Square would release the English version on October 11th, 1994, and would change the name to Final Fantasy III, keeping in line with the numerical sequence that only acknowledged games that were localized in the region. It was received extremely well by critics, many rating it with perfect or near perfect scores. It would also be awarded the Best RPG of the Year 1994 by EGM and GameFan, to include the awards for Best Music. For an RPG, it sold fairly well. Despite being part of a niche genre in the West, Final Fantasy VI sold nearly 900,000 copies within the North American region. With the combined sales being almost 3.5 million copies, Final Fantasy VI ended up being the 12th best-selling game on the Super Nintendo, just below Donkey Kong Country 3, and one spot above Killer Instinct. It also sold more total units than its primary JRPG rival, Dragon Quest VI, even if it sold less than Dragon Quest VI did in Japan. This was the first time a Final Fantasy game sold more total units than a Dragon Quest game. Final Fantasy VI would continue to be well regarded as the years went by, especially after the RPG boom caused by its successor, Final Fantasy VII. As such, it would see re-releases and remasters across multiple consoles. This would include the PS1, Game Boy Advance, mobile, PC, PlayStation 4, and Nintendo Switch. And that is your brief history of Final Fantasy VI.
All right. Thank you, Chris, for that brief history. You know, I honestly, I'm actually kind of surprised. I was expecting the brief history to be not so brief on this one, but it was in fact. The dude would be impressed. Brevity's his thing.
Yeah, we kept the brief history brief on this one. They wanted to make another Final Fantasy game. They wanted to close out the console. What you see for a lot of Final Fantasy games, particularly starting with 7, I think this is mostly because 7 was like the big watershed moment for JRPGs in the West. So you get all this information, and then you get more on 8, 9, and then 10 had a little bit as well. But before that, it just feels like Square was a JRPG factory. Enix was a JRPG factory. So you're not getting a ton. It wasn't a console shift either. So like Sakaguchi, who was as mentioned in the brief history, and as we mentioned before with Final Fantasy, he was also working on Chrono Trigger at the time. And there's probably more interesting tidbits about Chrono Trigger if we went to brief history than Final Fantasy VI, because Chrono Trigger was specifically delayed so Final Fantasy VI could get completed. And that had like a bunch of other people. If we ever get to Chrono Trigger, I'd love to talk about that there. Today's not that day, but there's probably reasons why it's a pretty cut and dry brief history for what I would call like a gigantic game in the zeitgeist of JRPG culture. I would assume.
Enix makes another RPG, more at 11.
At that time, yeah, that's how it was. It's just how the world worked.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the history there, Rick?
You know what's funny, and it always strikes me whenever I'm thinking about this game, this is revered today, right? Like, this is considered one of the classics, one of the greatest of all time by many Final Fantasy fans, or at least in the running for the greatest of all time. But the creators didn't really see this as a commercial success. Like, it sold well, but it wasn't like gangbusters. Like, they didn't see this as some kind of crazy success. So the reputation that it has today is, I mean, to them especially, it's got to be super surprising. But all that being said, like, it's so well deserved. This is as close to a masterpiece as this series comes. I mean, 9 will always be my favorite. It's my forever favorite game, but 6 is constantly in a tied second place with 10 for just my favorite Final Fantasy of all time. There's so much in this game that is perfect or near perfect. The writing, the music, the depictions of the final battle, which is far and away my favorite final battle in all of Final Fantasy. It's just brilliant. It's amazing. Even with the, let's say, rough translation for the SNES done by Ted Woolsey, which, to be fair, was done under extreme time constraints, space constraints, and pressure.
So many more things. I think Woolsey did the best job he could. And we'll talk about that when we get into the plot and writing. But I think all things considered, it's still a fantastic localization and probably the best of what they could do during the Nintendo era for a game like this, especially. But before we move further into really the nitty gritty of the game itself, since you're kind of already there, Rick, let's talk about your personal experiences with Final Fantasy VI. And since this is your first time here on the show proper, what are your personal experiences with the Final Fantasy franchise?
Oh, sure. So franchise-wise, the first that I played was 9. And I know what everyone's thinking. Well, of course it's your favorite because it's the first one you played. I get it. Like, I know that's how it goes. But I've played almost all of the heavy hitters so far, with the exception of 4. I know I still need to get to 4. Sorry, Ray. I know. But, I've played them and I've replayed them. 9 just still holds up so near and dear to me. It was the game that got me into video games with stories. Because before that, I was largely playing the Sega Saturn fighters, like Battle Arena Toshinden Remix and Fighters Megamix, Virtua Fighter, and then Need for Speed and Pokemon. That was really it. And then I found this and I was like, oh my God, characters can have feelings like me. Imagine that. It's not just the youngster talking about how cool shorts are in Pokemon Red. So that's what got me started on Final Fantasy. I played through as many as I could. 6, funny enough, I have zero nostalgia for, because I played it for the first time in 2021, where I emulated it. I emulated the SNES version, and, no nostalgia playing it in 2021 in the modern times. I mean, it still became one of my favorites. I mean, like I said, it's tied for my second favorite with 10, and probably always will be. They kind of go back and forth depending on how I'm feeling, but this game is just marvelous. I really think it does so much right. It's not perfect. There are definitely some, I don't want to say points of friction, but there are some things that are maybe not optimized or missed opportunities. But even all of that aside, I mean, I fell in love with it as soon as I started playing it. That opening credits crawl as Terra's theme plays and they're marching towards the city. It just, oh my God, it's so good. So yeah, no nostalgia, but I fell in love almost immediately.
Yeah, that opening credits crawl is something extremely special. One of the iconic moments in video gaming for sure, especially for those who have played this game. So Shane,
yes,
let's go to you next here, because I know I'm probably going to talk way too long on this. So Shane, what's your personal experience with Final Fantasy VI?
Oh, you don't want to know about my experience with the whole series? Okay, yeah, we can skip that.
We've talked about that before. I mean, you can go there. This is, but
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
I see the preferential treatment. It's whatever. Yeah, you guys are FF6 buddies. It's cool.
Retro Hangover talks Final Fantasy news at 11, like you said earlier. That is
fair. FF6. Let's see. So for me, I a little while back. Well, I said a little while. It's almost a decade now. Now that I think about it, quite a while back, I was trying to make a point of going and actually playing some of these Final Fantasy games because I never had. 2 of those that I kind of went to right off the bat were FF4 and 6. Like, spoilers for, I think so far, though we've played through a pretty good chunk of Final Fantasy games on the show at this point, 4 is still my favorite, just FYI. Yeah, so I played 6. I played the GBA version, actually. I got like a used copy of it from one of our local game stores and played it that way. So that was my first like experience with Final Fantasy VI. I had not played the original version, haven't emulated it or anything like that. So, but that was pretty much it for me. I want to say, I can't remember if it was 4 or 6. I think it was 4. I managed to, a friend of mine actually gave me a strategy guide for one of them because they heard that I was playing it and they were like excited and they're like, here, I have this. It might have been 4, but at any rate, that's pretty much it for me. Nothing terribly exciting. I just finally got around to playing it at some point.
cool. I'm happy that you say 4 is still your favorite, because that means that mean, we're inevitably going to get to 4 anyway. 4 is also my favorite, and I think I have the perfect idea for a guest for that as well, or a few guests that I could think of for that one. But let's not talk about 4 quite yet. We got a ways to go for that. So for myself, as I've mentioned before on the show, at least I hope I've mentioned, I'm sure if I haven't, I'll get called out. Around the time Final Fantasy VI came out was the time I was getting into Final Fantasy. I had discovered Final Fantasy for the Nintendo, the original NES, my first Final Fantasy. And this was around 93, 94. And one of the things I realized, there was podcast brain. There was a issue. God, magazines are so ancient now. I can't remember the word for them. But there was an issue of Game Informer because I was subscribed to Game Informer back then through Funko Land.
Jesus, that's a string of words that somebody hasn't said in a long time.
Yeah, I know. And I remember the specific issue I was looking into it was because there was a review of Donkey Kong Country. And maybe I might be wrong on this one. I know Donkey Kong Country was in it, but it may have also included the dual review of Mortal Kombat 2, comparing the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of the game. Those are the games I was interested in because, when you're 9 or 10, you're into mainstream gaming. It's just what you are, especially back then during the console wars and the 16-bit generation. It was a beautiful, beautiful time to be a kid. When I started getting into the Final Fantasy games, I started wondering, what else is there? And then for some reason, I remember seeing a Final Fantasy 3 review around the same time that it came out and not really paying it much attention because I didn't know a new Final Fantasy game was coming out. I wasn't even really concerned about sequels. I just knew this Final Fantasy game was good. But once I started playing the original Final Fantasy, I was like, wait, I think I've seen this before. And so I went back and I realized, oh, there's a third Final Fantasy. They've made sequels to this. This is really cool. And it's supposed to be really good. And by the time I realized it, it had started to come up on my birthday. And I was like, I think I'm going to ask this game for my birthday. And in between, I had started renting, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, Final Fantasy 2, of course, we know it's 4, and just hyping myself up for it. Never getting those games, of course, because I was just interested in the newest thing because that's kid brain. Like the newest thing is the best thing. My birthday comes along and I swear, I think this is my birthday. God, I hope it's my birthday because it's just how my headcanon is. I'm just going to roll with it. My dad comes home. I'm, back at school and he comes home from work and he says, Hey, Chris, I got something for you. I'm like, hey, okay, cool. Oh, what is this? I know it's my birthday. I'm going to get a birthday present. And he pulls out a bag and there's the shape of a Super Nintendo game. I'm really hyped up and he hands it to me. And he's like, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, here it is, Final Fantasy 3. I'm so excited. And I open up the bag. And it's in some wrapping paper. I open up the wrapping paper and there it is. Troy Aikman football. And
hell yeah.
What you do, what a kid would do. I guess I had some sort of manners at the time, which is shocking to me, all things considered. And I just said, oh, thank you for Troy Aikman football. And he looks at me and he said, oh, we got to go back to Toys R Us because that's not the game that I got the ticket for. And we need to go fix this right now. So, yeah, we went back into his Final Fantasy 3 that he intended to get me. And I can still remember, like that cover in my head with Mog on the little dagger with the shadow of Kefka in the background. And I started playing the hell out of that game. It was my favorite game of all time for almost forever. Was when forever meaning 3 years until like Ocarina of Time came out. And then it became Final Fantasy 3 again down the line. But like that was my jam. That was the entirety of my life. That was like my identity. It was Final Fantasy 3. And the only reason I ended up beating it was because when I was in the Velt, I ended up sketching Gao with Realm, and it completely bugged the shit out of my game. And I got out of the battle, I saved it, I turned the game off because it was acting weird and turned it back on. And then when I looked at the inventory, it had 99 of every item to include gem boxes and economizers. And what that means is that there are items, the economizer allows you to cast all magic at one magic point. And the gem box changes magic into X magic, which allows you to cast like I think 2 spells per turn. So I just was like, okay, everyone's getting Ultima and I'm just breaking it. And that's my Final Fantasy VI story. And I have played this game repeatedly over the years. I have beaten it without breaking the game, if anyone is curious, multiple times. But yes, the first time I beat it when I was 10 years old was glitching the game out unintentionally because I thought it would be funny to try and sketch Gao in the Velt. And apparently the game did not like that. I do not know how that was not found in QA because like that wasn't something you would just go online and find out in 1995. Not even me, even though I had internet, I didn't know about GameFAQs. That was just curiosity. And it still blows my mind that that made it into the final game back then. Yeah, this is one of those games that is extraordinarily special to me. It's very formative and really helped establish the kind of video game player I am today and where I am in terms of probably culture, life-wise values, everything like that, just from a video game and just from reading a lot of the text in there and just, you know, how it formed my mindset and worldviews, which I know is probably really weird to hear when you're speaking about video games, but it's the truth when that's the form of media that you mostly consume. So yeah, Final Fantasy VI, very important game for me. So
Jesus. All right. Yeah. No pressure for this conversation or anything. You're like, this game literally formed me as a person. Fuck. All right.
I don't know. Like, I don't want to like overstate it or use hyperbole, but I think it did. I really think it did.
I do also like the continuity between this episode and the previous one with Okami in that there are more drawing related mishaps.
Yeah. The celestial brush of Realm. She stole it from Okami 12
Mm-hmm.
years before Okami came out. It's total theft.
Right.
But now it's time to get into the plot and writing as we were intimating here earlier. Because of course we do this every episode. Why wouldn't we talk about the plot and writing? So let's set this up really quick. What's going on in Final Fantasy VI? As we talked about, there's this opening scroll where you have the Magitech armor that are marching towards this cave city. And I'm really briefly going to tell you all what that's all about. The game opens up. There's a character that you don't have the name of. She seems to be under the control of outside forces, but we know today that this is the Empire. They are using her with some soldiers to try and capture an Esper. What are Espers? They're magic beasts that have extreme amounts of power, and they're relying on her because she can use magic, and they're using something called a slave crown in order to control her, and your mission is to go get the Esper. You go find the Esper, she has a mysterious connection with it, and then all hell breaks loose. She gets unconscious. She is found by the local denizens of the city that you now know is called Narch or Narche, whatever it's called. They help her out, and then she tries to escape. You have a character called Locke who has to go help her. They get out, and then they meet with a king in the castle of Figaro, where you learn about the returners who are fighting against the Empire. So this is a story about how eventually you, as a group called the Returners, are trying to fight against the Empire, at least in the beginning. And then it becomes so much bigger about the history of this world, its lore, and maybe an apocalypse or two. But I'm sure we'll talk about that as that unfolds. Rick, I'm going to start with you again. I know me and you have talked about this at great length, but we aren't going to have that time today. What's your thoughts on the story in general?
I know we don't have that kind of time today, but would you mind if I took a moment to just talk about this beautiful intro?
You absolutely can.
Okay. I love intros. I love intros in media because it is the hook, right? And same with literature and everything. It's the hook. It is the thing that you use to grab your listener's attention, your player's attention. And this one is phenomenal. The games in the Final Fantasy series up until this point have largely been, I don't want to say lighthearted, but they certainly were not this dark. 4 went there a little, right? Knowing what I know about 4, I haven't played it, but 5 especially, the games were much more light in tone. This one immediately opens up. It's this black and storming sky. We get the opening organ intro. It's these stacked harmonies and fourths. It's what we call quartal harmony. This is a little different from Strauss's tone poem, also Sprach Zarathustra, which is of course, based on Nietzsche's work of the same name. That's built in quinto harmony, but it's a direct homage to that because you get up to the top, boo doo doo doo, ba ba. It's the same exact motif, and it's wonderful. Maybe an homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Who knows? But as the text is setting up the preamble to the story, we're getting these funeral bells that are dinging as the music continues up the scale, doo doo doo, that minor scale. What I love about this is, what do bells represent, right? They represent funerals, of course, like I mentioned, finality, death, the end of something, but they also represent new beginnings, the new beginning of an hour, the new beginning of a marriage. So we have this duality here of this suggested symbolism of there's a beginning and an end, and it's happening right now at the same time. The end of the magic era, the beginning of this new technological industrial revolution. And this game is setting this up all within the first, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's incredible. It lets you know exactly what to expect from the start. And there wasn't anything like this in this catalog of Final Fantasy until this game. And boy, howdy, did it set the stage for 7. I really think 7, this is maybe a hot take, I really think 7 took a lot and owes a lot of its success to 6. Having played 7 first and then 6, I see so much of the DNA that transferred over. Sephiroth would not exist without Kefka, and so on and such forth. But this intro, man, I love it so much. And then, of course, as we mentioned, that iconic opening credits crawl, which they removed the credits in the Pixel remaster. Yeah. And I will never not be upset about that because it makes it feel so much less impactful.
And one of the reasons it feels less impactful that you alluded to is that shift in tone from this more high fantasy type of RPG into a more cinematic one. Now, I don't know if I said this on this show proper. I'm sure I've said it somewhere within like the satellite of the show or other shows, perhaps. Final Fantasy VII gets a lot of credit, also going to a point of yours, for being like the start of the cinematic RPG because of all the movies that were in it, all the FMVs. But if you really want to talk about how a Final Fantasy game, where it went cinematic, the tones that it decided to take and how it was telling its story, Final Fantasy VI was really that new point, that really new development point. You just look at the setting, just the setting itself that you're mentioning. And I'm not going to go into the music. I could never say it as well or as eloquently as you just did. But just in terms of everything that's just set up, Final Fantasy 1 through 5 were all high fantasy. Yes, it had a little bit of sci-fi in there. Like you go to the moon in 4. There's an ancient high-tech civilization in 5. There's time travel in 1. Probably something in 2 and 3. I don't know. They were mostly all high fantasy. But you get to 6 and all of a sudden it's like steampunk or another kind of something punk. It's not high fantasy anymore. Yes, you have kings and castles, but that's not really the focus. Like the emperor isn't in a castle. He's in this giant mechanical city. Narch is a steam powered city. You have modern takes on things. Like there's the way that sets are dressed, for example, as a gambler. Like that's not something you'd find in a high fantasy Renaissance setting, for example. Like it's very, very steampunk. You have chainsaws and drills and magical armor. Like it's taking a different direction. And just that opening crawl is just very symbolic of that with the credits. It's saying this is a new direction for Final Fantasy. We are taking a new approach to this. And it makes it very evident, and it wants you to know that. So when you say that Final Fantasy VII took a lot from 6, absolutely it did. It also had more of a focus on characters as individuals, which is something that is actually a criticism of 7, but not so much a criticism of 6. And I think it is a criticism of 6 when it comes to the gameplay, much like 7. But I think one of the reasons it's not so much focused on with 6 is because 6 doesn't, in terms of its plot, doesn't narrowly focus on any one singular character. They genuinely try giving their focus and spreading that plot point and development among a bevy of characters, whether that be Locke, Tina or Tara, Celeste, the Figaro brothers, right? You can make an argument that any single one of those could be a character that you want to see as the main protagonist. I think the strongest case is for Celeste or Tara, but you can make that argument around. If that was their objective, they nailed that objective and they were very successful in doing so. I don't know. Like I've also been on record before, and I don't know again if this is on the show, but I've definitely, adjacent sources that this is the most adult story in the Final Fantasy franchise. I know Rick, you'll probably say Final Fantasy IX is right there, if not better. But I think there's a certain level of maturity that was approached in Final Fantasy VI that took on issues or took on discussions that you would not see in a typical video game, especially of that time. And I still think today a lot of JRPGs in particular don't do as good of a job as addressing these in the subtleties and nuances that Final Fantasy VI does, and even a lot of Western games especially. So in terms of what this game was able to accomplish in terms of its writing and storytelling, and even with the localization restraints Nintendo was putting on Square in terms of censorship, how much time Ted Woolsey had to put a localization together, like you're talking about a monumental example of taking serious plot threads and themes and converting them in such a way that they are understandable and without completely just like neutering them for the audience. And I think that's where Final Fantasy VI really stands on its two legs. I know I covered a lot there, Shane, but what are your thoughts on the plot and writing for Final Fantasy VI?
Jesus, I feel like I'll just roll up in here and be like, "Oh, it's good. It's really good." No, but in all seriousness, though, I mean, part of what you touched on there, as far as like trying to make it so that almost every character that you come across as far as permanent like party members sort of function as their own protagonist, is that was super intentional right from the get-go, because they went into this basically teaming up to write the story and to create the characters. So it wasn't necessarily like one or two people putting all of this together, like you may see in other games or even in previous Final Fantasy games. But in this one, they took that a very intentional approach of like, okay, we want to make it so that we can give proper due time to each one of these characters as much as possible. So we want you two to come up with a few characters, you to come up with a few, et cetera, and then they all sort of collaborated on writing the story and then pulling it together into this cohesive like narrative. And so this is that end result. And that it's wild to me, because that is something that could very easily have gone horrendously wrong because of how potentially fractured that could have been. One example that comes to mind is, I don't know, Quake, right? We talked about that, where it was just like, yeah, we had like 3 or 4 different people doing different parts of the game. And then what you ended up with, as much as I love Quake, is a very like disjointed experience where it's almost really obvious that different people worked on different parts of this game. And even as a kid, you wouldn't necessarily know that, but you had that feeling where you're just like, this seems kind of weird. Like these things don't go together. But they managed to pull that off pretty well here, all things considered, to where you're kind of taking all these different ideas from at least half a dozen different people on the development team and pulling them all together. That part I really do admire, as far as them being able to pull that off successfully, because that, I'm sure that was no mean feat.
No, absolutely not. And some of the things I was looking at the research is that was part of their focus, is once they got all the character ideas and their arcs and what made these characters, I think they went to Yoshinori Kitase, and said, hey, make this make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is your focus. Like, hey, make these blend together and make this story make sense. And everyone was like, would have to look at it and make sure that the story made sense, because that was the focus of what these JRPGs were back then. Is as fun as the gameplay mechanics were. And there's, of course, this rumor that says that all the even numbered Final Fantasies at the time were supposed to be plot focused. I don't know if that's official or not, because if you look at the way that they're developed, 1, 3, and 5 were more about systems and developing gameplay systems for the player, whereas 2, 4, and 6 were more heavily plot focused. If that was their objective here, yeah, I think they certainly nailed that. We're going to get into some spoiler territory here, and if you don't like that, I can understand. This is a 30-year-old game now, doing this for the 30th anniversary, which is awesome. I love that. I can't believe it's 30 years old. I understand if you don't like that, but I do want to talk about how this game kind of develops here, because there is a shift in the middle, and I don't know how we're going to get to that. There are two worlds, the world of ruin and the world of balance. The world of balance is what you start out in, and this is very unique how this game handles this, because this is one of the few games where the bad guy wins like midway through the game, which many people will probably assume their first time playing to be the end of the game, but it doesn't happen. Like, it follows a very, I don't want to say generic, but somewhat generic JRPG path, while still covering some significant themes and issues in terms of its plot, in terms of its gravity, and how it's trying to tell a story. But then there's this giant shift, this giant schism, where essentially the world ends and you're thrusted into a completely non-linear plot development system in the second half of the game. A lot of people don't like that. Now, before I get to my own thoughts on this, Rick, what's your thoughts on how this game divides up its story, especially in terms of how they approach the middle there?
I think it was extremely inventive and creative. I really, really like it. It's interesting. I mean, leading up to that conflict in the middle, the climax, so to speak, the point at which the narrative can no longer return to normalcy or go back to the way it was. You're going up to that point and it is par for the course. It feels like the final dungeon. You literally fight Ultima Weapon, or what is it? Ultima Weapon? Is that the name of it?
In the West, it's called Atmo Weapon, but it's supposed to be Ultima Weapon. Yeah.
Yes. And, I think its leading boss, like right before you fight it, says something like, you'll never defeat me, or something along those lines. It's set up to feel very final. But much like the series, this is not the Final Fantasy of this game. I hate myself so much. But then suddenly, like, every expectation is subverted. You don't know what to expect, because up to this point, we did not expect Kefka to be anything more than a mid-boss. We did not expect him to be the major antagonistic force. Yes, we saw him do some heinous shit. We saw him poison an entire town, basically just because he wanted to. But he was never given the treatment, or it was never explicitly called out that he was going to be a major player. Suddenly he is, and he kills who we thought was going to be the big bad. Suddenly we're thinking, oh, what? And then Kefka wins, and you're like, what? And then it turns into a quasi open world game, and suddenly, like, you don't know what to think anymore. I think that is profoundly creative. I don't have as big of a breadth of knowledge as the two of you on the Super Nintendo and games of that era, but as far as I know, games did not do this back then. This was new stuff. If I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm happy to learn, but this is just so creative. And I mean, they're looking at this, not just as a video game. It's like you were mentioning, Chris. This is something that is more cinematic. I think of this whole game like theater. This whole game plays out as a theater piece to me. Everything from the dialogue to the staging to the way that characters interact and break the fourth wall. It's theater, man. And I think it's so inventive that they did this in a game. 100% love it. I don't have any criticisms of this at all. Although I will say, I'm sorry for listeners that have never heard my show. I'm a loquacious one. There's a $10 word for you. I go on. I talk. I go at length. I expound. I'm not going to do that bit. I'm sorry. If I were playing this when it was contemporary, I would not have found everybody, man. I would have been so lost.
I think that's a fair criticism, and I think that'll be great for when we get into the gameplay. But in terms of its story, I actually think that the way that it does it and how it ties it all together, I think makes the game better. I know a lot of people do not like the world of Ruin, mostly because of its open worldness. But I think with a lot of the character arcs that are established in the world of balance, and a lot of the themes they're trying to accomplish in the world of balance, how they tie them together, with a lot of the game's main theming being around finding yourself and identity and self-acceptance and finding something to live and to fight for. The World of Ruin is necessary. How it brings those characters to the forefront and addressing their issues without having that real separation between the two worlds, without having that finality or seeming finality with the world ending and driving in hopelessness. That is a major theme for one of the, which I think is the character's real main character, which would be Tara. That's not a hot take. Celeste is definitely one that I already said you can make the argument for. But, you know, when you get into the fact that she's half Esper and half human, and she's trying to figure out, you know, what makes her human. Is her humanity something of value? Is her being a half human preventing her from being a full human? And can she ever have the capability of loving like a human does? Not to say Espers can't, because they definitely have, you know, their little city and society before the game that the Empire goes and destroys. But she's always questioning, is she like everybody else? And having that all tie together in the World of Ruin in the way that it does, and her discovering what matters to her is brilliant. And she's not like alone in how those characters develop. Like Celeste, when you take control of her as the first character after the world ends in the World of Ruin, her hopelessness and her loneliness, and how when you find her, she's essentially a spy, and then she is just like given up on by everybody, and finally finds something that can resemble a group, a home, someone to care for, and they're all eradicated in a moment's notice, and she thinks they're all dead. And she's back being alone again. Now she's off trying to find all of her friends. And in a very dramatic moment, you know, one of the major themes where a game from 1994 on a system that everyone thought was for kids, you have a scene that implies attempted suicide, which you were not getting in 1994 anywhere in North America, at least. And like when you say, Rick, you know, did this happen? Was this commonplace? If it was, I can't recall anything in a North American release that did. Perhaps in Japan, because this was a bigger deal there. But I have nothing to compare it to in terms of a North American release. So having that counterbalance in the World of Ruin, and just that hopelessness, and how those arcs find their final phase and really fulfill the characters, their motivations. I think the World of Ruin is definitely one of the best narratively developed creations within the series in terms of how they play towards the characters, because the overall plot with the World of Ruin, it's over, but it's a very character driven experience, and how they deliver on those promises, I don't think can really be compared to any other game within the Final Fantasy series in any release, really. And I'm really trying hard to think about it. And I'm trying to like steel man this with 9, but 9 is just such a progression. I know they have their moments, but I think that the way they separate it in 6, the way they sever it so harshly, and the way they recover it, I can't really think of another entry in the series where they do it nearly as seamlessly or as emotionally impactful, if that makes sense.
That's extremely well said, man. I could see comparison points to 9. I mean, 9's major theme, according to the developers, was to live with an exclamation point.
Right.
I'm sure we'll get to the final battle eventually, but when you get there, your whole party, you know, is confronted with this twisted demiurge. Oh, I fucking love that battle so much, dude. This corrupted, distorted version of a god asking them, like, what are you even living for? Like, this is pointless. What's the point? And everybody's giving their reasons to live. I can see a parallel to that to 9, but the way that this is handled in 6, like you said, I'm not going to paraphrase what you said because you said it so well. It's extremely unique, and man, it's set up the rest of the series for such success. It's a really beautiful thing. The complementary nature between the two, it's sort of almost like a yin yang, you know, how it's light and dark, but there's just a little bit of each bleeding into each other. So there's always a little bit of hope in the world of ruin. There's always that glimmer of hope that we can make things right. And, you know, like any fantasy story, we do eventually. I mean, we've gotta, just how it is. But it's so masterfully done.
I want to talk about Kefka. Before we do you have anything to add on any of this, Shane?
Nope.
Okay.
It's almost as if you guys have talked about this at length.
Just a little bit. No discussion about this game's plot or story can go without talking about the game's main villain, which many people consider to be one of the best villains in all of gaming history, which is, of course, Kefka. He is the assistant to the Emperor. And as we have already said, midway through the game, he kills the Emperor and he becomes the big bad. Now, why do I think people love Kefka? Because he's a dick. I don't think there's really much more to it than that. I know I personally love Kefka because he is evil without remorse. And in modern day, that's refreshing, because a lot of times today, when we try to think about our villains, we try to think of a villain. And when I say we, I mean, I'm just talking about writers and how we pursue video games here. We try to make our villains more empathetic. Like, we try to find the reason, like, why are they evil?
Thanos was right.
Who hurt him? Yeah, Thanos was right. Or yeah, we try to legitimize their evilness, right? And try to find a perspective like, yeah, we could see that. They don't do that with Kefka. They slightly do at one point, where they say that he was a victim of experiments, but you come to find out later that was mostly a story that they're telling you. So you, the player, might feel sorry for him, but there is no real intention on like him being felt sorry for in that instance. It was kind of like, oh yeah, we locked him up and he was an experimental mess and his mind broke. And you could maybe get some empathy for him from that, but they don't really see that. The people in control, and certainly Kefka, does not see that as a weakness. It just seems to be something that he thought made him stronger. And he just becomes like this maniacal, evil god with the power of everything. He just doesn't care. Rick has pointed out that I've heard him say that he exudes the mentality of a nihilist, that nothing matters and he can just destroy everything. I don't want to take words out of your mouth, Rick. I wanted to say that I didn't want to take full credit for it, because I know you have said that before in the past.
Actually, do you mind if I interject super quick on that point?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
I was actually going to bring this up and lobby it as a point of discussion to you two. I hear everybody praise Kefka for being a sort of vehicle for nihilism in games. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think he is more sociopathic than anything. Because what is nihilism? It is the fundamental belief, and this is so reductive. I am not an expert on nihilism, and this is not the podcast to learn about it, if I may say so.
Correct.
The Dick Dragon joke show? Yeah, no.
The Dick Dragon has inherent meaning. Nobody is disputing this. But nihilism, I mean, is the thought that life itself inherently has no meaning or point. Morals, it's all human made. But nowhere, and when I say nowhere, I'm using that in broad strokes, and that doesn't translate to life is pointless, so let's burn it all down. That's where Kefka goes. He takes several steps up the ladder and skips a bunch of rungs. If life is meaningless, let's just burn it all down right now. Let's burn this fucker to the ground. And that's not nihilism. That's oh man, I'm having an Uematsu moment. Sociopathy. Did I get that?
You did. Sociopathy. Yeah.
Thank you, Shane. I knew I could count on you, Shane.
Count on me for something.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject so quickly, Chris, but that's if you have anything to say on it, either of you, I would love to hear it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see Kefka as a nihilist.
No, I think it's a great point. I think his end state, or final form, one might say, I don't think tracks with nihilism. I think he maybe takes a scenic route through nihilism, but that's not where he lands. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because you're right. in my kind of poking around the internets about, some other takes on this, that seems to be the general consensus, is that, he is sort of this representation / beacon of just abject nihilism and stuff like that. And you're right. I don't think that's accurate, because him taking it that extra step and saying like, well, no, let's just annihilate everything, then that goes beyond that. So I don't think it's that we don't flirt with nihilism at any point, because we certainly do, but I think he pretty quickly goes past that.
Man, see, you framed this as the Dick Jokes podcast, and then you say something that insightful. Come on, man, give yourself some credit.
I gotta keep my cards close to the chest. I have to surprise people every now and again.
The dick jokes get insightful. You could say they get inside you. Am I right?
Okay, there it is.
See? Yeah, bring it on back.
Everything perfectly in balance, as it should be.
Yeah.
No, but Chris, I actually really like that you make that point though about, sort of that like moral ambiguity thing, because it was a fresh take like 10 plus years ago at this point, right? Where it's just like, wow, we're exploring the villain, archetype, and they're not just bad for the sake of being bad. Like let's look into their motivations and make them like an empathetic character. And that's not an inherently bad approach, but I do have to agree. And I refer to this as like the Disney problem, because it's something that you see in Disney films now, where they almost categorically refuse to have a villain who is just a villain for the sake of being a villain. Every quote end quote villain that has been in any recent Disney, and when I say Disney, I mean animated films specifically. I feel like I should be clear about that. But any villainous character that they have is not even necessarily a bad person or bad thing. Sometimes they're not people, mostly anthropomorphic stuff. And honestly, that's kind of a bummer. Like I sometimes just having a clear black and white, I mean, it's the oldest story told, right? Of just like good versus evil. I mean, there's a reason that works. Can there be, and I'm not saying that the characters need to be one dimensional, because that's not necessarily the go-to either. You can have them be somewhat rounded out, but there's definitely a space to have characters they're just evil. They have evil motivations. They want to see the world burn. They dislike, other human beings, whatever. And I feel like that's missing in a lot of modern media, because it's almost like we're too afraid to have somebody be a bad guy just because they want to be a bad guy, without having to like soften the blow almost of like, oh, but like, here's their tragic backstory, and so that's why they're bad. It's like, no, they just want to fuck things up. Like that's it,
I also think when you look at a character like Kefka, it's a little bit more than just evil for being the sake of evil. I mean, that's essentially what he is, right? When you just look at it even on the surface level. But I think for a lot of other even high fantasy stories, when you hear that a character is evil, you just assume they're evil because you are told they're evil.
Right.
With Kefka, he's evil because you see him being evil. You see him doing evil things, and it's not tropish evil things. Like you see him committing a war crime with him poisoning Doma and like slaughtering everybody. Normally when you get these events where a bad guy will destroy a city, which has happened in the Final Fantasy series prior to this, like most notably in Final Fantasy 2, when the Emperor in that story just like levels some towns, you only see like the towns explode, and that's it. And like it's much different when like you think of a town exploding, because you don't really see the human element of it. You just know people die, but that's it. But with Doma, you see him poisoning it, and you see people slowly dying, and people, the more human element of it. This isn't a city exploding. You're seeing individuals perish one by one, and you're seeing him take glee in that. And that's not something that's typical of being expressed in video game form, or even much of Western media at that time, mainstream Western media at least, especially something that was being consumed by preteens. This is not something you generally see expressed. And also, like, what was a typical evil for the sake of evil motivation for taking over the world? They just wanted to take over the world because that's what evil people do. When Kefka takes over the world, it's more like the world becomes his plaything. Like, they don't disobey him, but he's chaotic and unpredictable. You don't really know why he wants to take over the world. He just seems to think like he's taking over the world because he seemingly can. And that's why he wants to. Because he can do it. Not because he wants to do it, but it's like, it's something to do. And it's something that can make other people feel pain and make him somehow feel good about himself, or whatever the case might be. And that isn't typically expressed from just blank slate villains that are just evil. And it even gets in the backstories like, oh, why are they this way? But it doesn't do that with Kefka. He is truly like an evil clown to the greatest extent. Not like it either, not like corny, but like,
hey now.
but like a truly evil being that you see mature in their evilness. And I think that's what makes him so special in video gaming. Like, he's horrific. You see the horror of what he does. And this is why I don't like Sephiroth. This is why I can't stand Sephiroth. He's always moping. He always feels bad about himself.
He's the My Chemical Romance of Final Fantasy villains.
Yeah. He summons Meteor by singing the Black Parade, essentially. You know, it's just, everyone feels sorry for me. Like, I don't. No, I don't. Like, I mean, I understand his backstory, but you never get that. You never get that with Kefka, and that's what I love about him.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think the big part of that is that it's not just that. I mean, you do make a good point. And I don't want to like take away from that you see these things occurring, and it's not just sort of abstracted away, you know, of like, oh yeah, it was a city. It's like, no, it was these people. But I think the other important like factor here is that it's not that he's just doing these, you know, unspeakable acts, but he like genuinely revels in it. And that is something you don't see very often.
Yeah, normally with typical bad guys being bad guys, it's something that needed to be done. With him, it's like, it didn't need to be done. This is fun.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, I could do it. And you know what? Hey, it's funny. And it's like, I guess not, but you're insane. And this is also very well done with the contrast with the character General Leo, who is also your enemy, but is more noble. And the contrast that they have in there. And I think like a lot of people really like General Leo as a character, but I think that makes it the character of Kefka even more important, because he is a very critical contrast to what Kefka is. So with that setup, you see the difference in your enemies, where, yeah, Leo is that typical bad guy with, you know, that story where it's even said in the text, like, if he wasn't my enemy, he could probably be my friend. Probably not the best localization, but like that's a very good point. Is you're asked to see the enemy as something more of your enemy, but you also have someone on the other side that's just like, nah, I'm insane. I think that's a brilliant case of character contrast, if I do say so. Rick, you kind of laughed there. What's your thoughts on maybe some of the dialogue?
I mean, that one in particular just cracks me up every time. It's so goofy. The dialogue as a whole. So something I see a lot of complaints about older games like this, and even into PS1 games from maybe younger players or people that play more current games, that, you know, the writing's not expansive enough. Everything is too short. You don't, it's, and so on and such forth. And part of that was practical limitations of the system memory, right? Mm-hmm. It's well documented that Ted Woolsey, like the translation or not, he finished his first draft and they said, okay, but you have to cut this in literally half because it's just too much. So gross. Yeah. And in 30 days to do the whole thing anyway, Herculean task. And while I don't love the translation, he did way better than I could have done. But oh no, I got sidetracked. Oh no. Oh no.
Woolsey translation.
Yes.
Woolsey translation.
I think this game reminds me so much of theater in so many ways, because like in live theater, you don't have these expansive exposition dumps. Well, sometimes you do, but you don't have these points of lore where you can read in menus about the history and so on and such forth. It is, you know, the characters are communicating with us, the audience. That's why, like, every time the characters will like look at the screen and do those laughs or the finger wags, it works on me every single time, because that is pure theater, man. I mean, that is them interacting with the audience. It's amazing, and I love it. And I don't think that that's a valid criticism of this game to say that, well, the text is, there's just not enough dialogue and character text. It's very weird to me, and it's kind of a symptom of games these days becoming hyper realistic cinematic movies. And like, don't get me wrong, I like a game like that now and then, but I mean, it's not a sin to ask the viewer, the player, the reader to do a little legwork of their own. You know, the reality is they're not walking 6 steps from Narsh to Doma or whichever town is next door. That would likely be like a miles long journey, but it's a game. We have to have some concessions here. I don't know. That's just something that I think about a lot. The translation as a whole, like, this is probably the best examples of Woolseyisms that I know of. Like the iconic line, "Son of a Submariner," that was all Woolsey. Like, he made that.
Of course.
There are some that I think kind of get in the way. Like there's a point right in the beginning where he inserts a Beavis and Butthead reference into Kefka's dialogue where he says, "Fire, fire, heh, heh." You know, I think it's period, comma, It's Beavis and Butthead. You know,
that was the soldiers next to Kefka. It wasn't Kefka himself, I don't believe.
Well, either way.
Either way, it's there.
Yeah,
it's there.
Exactly. There are some of those peppered out through here. I think a lot of them work. Some of them I'm not crazy about, but something that I found really interesting. By the way, there is, for folks listening, there is an amazing website called Legends of Localization that goes through all of these stories of localizations, like what is different through different versions. And they've got a whole thing on Final Fantasy VI. It's fascinating. But something that I learned through this that's very interesting is that the translation of some of the magic related things in here actually sound much cooler in English. Like in the Japanese, they kind of have 2 words for magic here, mado and maho. And it's really kind of dealing with this idea of like evil magic, like demons and things like that, which is why in the SNES version, this is translated as the Great Demon War in the beginning. And when they refer to the Magitex, I think they just refer to them as just Mado or something like that. But then for English, they made it Magitech, which sounds way cooler. And that's not often the case, you know. Oftentimes the localizations into English, from Japanese into English, don't hold up as well. But like Magitech, that's a damn cool word, you know?
Is really cool. Yes.
I really like it. Yeah, I don't, and full disclosure for everybody listening, I'm not at a level where I can play this in Japanese, so I can only go off of what other people have said. So I can't rightfully critique Woolsey. I can't rightfully talk about the localization. What I will say, though, is that the GBA version is widely considered to be better, I think, than the Woolsey version, unless you are fond of Woolsey and his Woolseyisms, I think. The Pixel Remaster kind of uses a bit of both. I don't know. I certainly liked it more than the SNES localization personally. But yeah, I really wish that I could speak the language better, man, so that I could have like played some of this in Japanese to have a better understanding. I listen to Resonant Arc a lot. They're a great show, and Kaysen on there speaks Japanese, and he was going on about how like Kefka is so different in the Japanese version than compared to how Woolsey kind of turned him into. I like Kefka, don't get me wrong, but I just really wish I could do this myself, you know, instead of having to rely on other parties to do it for me.
Interesting. I would love to hear that take. I need to go track down that episode where he's talking about Kefka then, with Kefka being one of my favorites.
Oh, you think our series was long, buddy? Ugh, check out theirs. Oh my God.
Speaking of going long, I do want to cover 2 things because we have covered the story part for quite some time. And once again, if you want more in depth, myself and Rick go very in depth over at the series at Pixel Project Radio. So go listen to that. And of course, all the other episodes over at Pixel Project Radio. It's a fantastic show, if I do say so myself, head on over there and check that out for sure. It will definitely cover more things here, but I do want all of your takes on the next two items here for story and writing before we move on to gameplay. And the first one is the Opera House, and the second one will be characters. So we have to talk about the Opera House because this is Final Fantasy VI, and Final Fantasy VI fans would probably be very upset if we did not talk about the Opera House. So what do you all think about the Opera House? Shane, do you have any feelings about the Opera House?
I feel like this is a very loaded question, and I don't, as someone coming to this game way after release and et cetera, I feel like I don't have like a strong opinion about this. I get the sense that I should, but like, I don't. I don't know.
That's the funny thing, because I don't either. I don't like the Opera House. This is why the only reason I wanted to bring it up is I don't like it. I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, it's really deep between Locke and Celeste. It's about their story. It's about their arc. Sure. When I see people say I cried at the Opera House, it's such a big moment. I think the Opera House is more of a flex by the developers rather than really much of a meaningful scene. And that's the reason I'm bringing it up, is because in the story section, because a lot of people think it's a big significant portion of the story. It's a really big meaningful moment. I don't feel that way, and I just want to make sure that I'm putting this on record on my own show. If you love it, great, but not the biggest fan, especially in the Pixel remaster, because it doesn't fuck around there. Like, you got to move, and it kind of pisses me off. But Rick, Opera House.
Oh, my heart. I love this part. And I'm going to be speaking exclusively in rhymes as we go on. So I hope you're ready for that. But
let's do it.
You know what's funny? You mentioned that they're flexing, is that the team that designed this, they didn't even go to an opera house on site. Like, they just, they had never been to one. So they just used their best judgment. I think that's so funny. And kind of ballsy too, right? Like, being told to go and do some field study, and they're like, nah, we got it. I love this, man. I mean, talk about theater. I mean, this whole game is theater, and you have actual theater in the game. How cool. I think it's really touching. I do think the lyrics kind of mirror Celeste and Locke's feelings towards each other. And what I love about that the most is that you hear the music of the opera scene, and you hear the motifs that it's setting up, and you just assume that it's about the opera, right? And then later on, when Celeste, I can't remember to whom she's speaking, but she's having a heart-to-heart where she's like growing as a character in her own feelings, and that motif comes back, and you realize, oh, that's not a leitmotif for the opera. That has now morphed into Celeste's leitmotif, and more specifically, her feelings. It's a leitmotif for her character, for her soul, for her heart. And I think that's really beautiful. I really do. The Pixel remaster version, something interesting here is that obviously there are now singers involved. They got like real voices instead of MIDI. And I think this is different depending on what language you play it in, but at least in English, they did not get like, or maybe they were trained, but they didn't have like full robust bel canto tenors and Verdi baritones singing this like they're trained musicians. It's kind of like they got a professional and said, okay, now sing it like you were in like high school, because the people putting on the opera, Celeste especially, she's not trained. She's a war general. What does she know about singing? It's like that Kanye quote, like, I like Gaga's music. What does she know about photography? Nothing. I think that was a really nice touch. I remember when I was replaying it for the for our episode, I heard that and I was like, did they do this on purpose? They had to have done this on purpose. I think that's kind of cool. It's kind of like a community theater kind of vibe.
Yeah, I think they did do this on purpose. I think you just said that too, but they did do this on purpose. Don't
worry. It's easy to tune me out whenever I go on and on.
No. I couldn't remember if you definitively said, damn it. I don't know if you definitively said they did tell them to do it as amateurs or not.
This is how we treat the guests on our show. We're just like,
yeah, I know.
I don't know.
I have just.
You were talking, but whatever.
Welcome. Thank you so much for showing up, Rick. I'm not listening to you.
Yeah, you wouldn't be the first.
Jesus. I fuck. No, I just couldn't remember if you said that you found that they definitively said they did or not, because I think I have heard they definitively did tell them to sound like amateurs.
I will give you $10 if that's not the case, because I just can't believe it to be an accident.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident either. I think they did try to make them be like, sound as amateurish as possible, because this is not trying to be a professional singer. I just didn't know if you said definitively or not. That's all I'm saying. Before it sounds like I insulted our guest, Shane. Thank you.
Hey man, I just call it like I see it.
I did blow that one. But okay, and lastly, in terms of plot and writing here, who are your favorite characters? Rick, I'll stay with you here. What if you're going to just make a party of 4? Who are you taking with you?
Oh my God. What a question. Jeez. Let's see. If I'm just going based on who I like and who I like to play as, I think I would go Locke, definitely Locke, Tara, Celeste, and believe it or not, probably Mog. I didn't use Shadow a whole lot. Nikes. I forgot about Sabin. Oh, how could I? Oh no. Well, now I'm in a quandary. I don't know what to do. I'm the kind of guy that when I'm playing RPGs, like I constantly swap my party members. I'm not somebody that can just settle on 4.
Same.
Jeez, Sabin. Okay, here's my definitive party, and then I'm done talking because I take up too much of Shane's time. I have taken up too much of Shane's time on this show already.
No, please go ahead. Whatever you're about to say, I guarantee is far more interesting than what I have to say. So knock yourself out.
Oh, millions listening would disagree. Okay, I'm rolling with Locke, Sabin, Tara, and Mog. That's it. I love Mog.
Mog's great. I would not have him.
I make him
there.
A dragoon every time I give him the jump ability because I think that's hysterical.
It is. I love it. Mog's adorable. He is adorable. I think for myself, I would go with if I'm just talking about like their characteristics and not gameplay, because gameplay is completely different. Because this game is broken. We're about to talk about that. Definitely Locke. Locke's always the character I put my name in as. I know a lot of people don't like doing that, but I do rename him as Chris. Sorry, I'm lame. But Celeste would be in my party. Edgar would also be in my party. I love Edgar. He's a total perv, and I laugh at that, and I enjoy that. And who's my 4th? I think just because of the way it wraps up, it's one of my favorite scenes in the game, in the World of Ruin, when you get the airship. I'm going to go with Setzer. Setzer's going to be my 4th.
Damn it. You basically stole my list. Okay. I was hoping you weren't going to say Setzer, because I was like, oh, okay, Rick didn't mention it yet. But yeah, no. Okay, so mine. Well, I'll start with Setzer. And by the way, I'm going purely off of like personality. This has nothing to do with like optimal party composition or whatever, but definitely Setzer, definitely Edgar. Locke seems to be a lock for all 3 of us, so I'm gonna stick with that. I can't not do that. And then I guess my 4th is kind of a toss up, but I feel like I kind of lean towards Mog, actually.
Yay. Yeah. That's why he's on the cover. He's the main character.
Do you guys remember that bonkers commercial that had like Mog interviewing monsters to promote this game in the States? And he has like that deep voice. He's like, next. So weird.
Yeah, kind of like a New Yorker. Like, next. I think that was it, right? I know he was bringing him in as, definitely.
Shane, do you think that was a convincing New York accent?
What's that?
No.
We're not going to do that. Okay.
Just say no.
Oh,
just say no.
Well, I mean, listen, I feel like I don't, I'm not the authority on New York accents. I could probably speak more towards like a Boston Northeastern accent personally, but you know what? You did an okay job, Chris. I'm sure there are real New Yorkers out there that will say otherwise, but I'm here for you.
Matt, aka Stormageddon, is going to probably say that it was horrible. So
well, they're probably
to them
right,
saying that.
But I'm just saying, I'm here to support you.
I hate you for lying to me like that. All right, moving forward. Okay, I think we have talked a ton about the story here, and rightfully so. That's a very strong point for this game, probably the strongest point for this game. But let's get into the gameplay, which it's Final Fantasy, has the active time battle that's prevalent up until Final Fantasy IX. What's different here from previous games? Well, there's no job system like in Final Fantasy V. It's somewhat similar to Final Fantasy IV, except each character doesn't really have a class. They have a class. Every character has a unique ability, but every character can learn magic, and they can learn magic from the magic piece we referred to earlier as espers. If you equip espers can teach you magic over time. They can also increase your stats. And in addition to your somewhat boilerplate equipment load that you have for each of your characters, you can also equip relics that can give you your characters special abilities. And needless to say, this game is, I don't know, I want to say it's broken, but that's just me. That's my opinion in terms of how this game play is. Other unique features that this game has is it has the ability to split your party and to have like little groups. So there's dungeons that will have some like light puzzles that will require movements of different party units working together. The final dungeon does this. There's, I guess, semi-cinematic sequences where you have to like break your parties into 3 and attack enemies with various tactics based on your party makeup. Those kind of things. That's the basics of the gameplay. So Rick, once again, I'm gonna keep the ball in your court. What's your thoughts on Final Fantasy VI's gameplay as a whole?
The ball's in my court. I'm driving up. I do a layup in my dreams. You know, I'm not going to have much to
You're really Duncan.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm like this, man. I'm sorry. I'm not.
Don't apologize. I'm worse.
I'm not going to have much to say that you two can't probably expound on in greater detail. I mean, the gameplay is good. I like the battle system. I think the fact that everybody's unique abilities essentially become moot and unnecessary towards the end is maybe my least favorite thing about this game. I mean, at a certain point, you're just going to turn everybody into an Ultima casting machine, and that's kind of the beginning and the end of it. This is a bit of a bummer, but you know, I like it. I like playing it. Sabin's inputs being like Street Fighter are so cool. Terra's transform, which is what Trance is modeled after in Final Fantasy IX. Very cool. I love that. I never used Setzer very much. So, and Mog constantly let me down with his dances. I feel like that shit never worked.
Never got it right.
Never. It's, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have a lot of meaningful things to say about the gameplay. It's fine. It's not my favorite battle system in the series. That goes to 10-2. I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about it. Also, I never used Realm because I was so scared of her sketch bug locking up my game, like you let off the episode with Chris.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, when I tried to use Realm, because, you know, when I was younger, I wanted to try out everyone's abilities and see how good they were. But I think the kind of like the position you're taking towards this somewhat mirrors my own, except I'm going to be a little bit more harsh and say that there's a reason I've kind of dialed back my praise for Final Fantasy VI as a whole, or, you know, to say like it's one of the best JRPGs of all time, or my favorite RPG on the Super Nintendo, or whatever the case might be. And that's specifically because of the gameplay and how unbalanced it is. You mentioned like Sabin and his Street Fighter inputs, which are great. But if you really compare it to all the other characters, none of them really perform at the level that Sabin does. So once you learn Bum Rush is almost a guaranteed max damage move, and all you got to learn how to do is a full circle on your D-pad. Now, some people are going to find that irritating. I can completely understand. But I figured it out no problem. So now Sabin's always a party member, because why would anyone else be a party member when I can just roll up with him and just do 9,999 damage and call it a day? And even more broken in a sense is his brother Edgar, because he has a chainsaw that you can get really early, and the drill also that ignore defense and also do massive damage. So when they have their like limited skills, some of these skills are not equal at all. Like, it's completely designed to just mess stuff up. And then by the end of the game, yeah, you're right. Everyone can just learn Ultima, by the way, through Paladin Shield, make Ragnarok an item, and then go get the Crystal Sword, the Holy Sword, whatever it is. What's it called? Ragnarok, the Illumina. I forget what it's called
Illuminati.
in the other translations,
Confirmed.
but yes, the Illuminati causes holy damage. So it's not that great because it somehow heals some enemies in the final dungeon, even though it's technically more powerful. Yeah, that's where I draw back, because the individuality of all the characters is somewhat eradicated by the end of the game, which is a problem I had with Final Fantasy VII. When it really came down to who's the best character, well, whoever has the most damaging limit breaks, because materia just makes every character inconsequential in how they operate. That's kind of where Final Fantasy VI ends up at the end of the game. As long as everyone has Ultima, whatever characters don't are not going to be in your party at the end of the game, or they're going to be a thorn in your side as you try to figure out what to do with them. And that's unfortunate because the game does such a good job at developing its characters. On top of that, gameplay is just, I don't know, it's just like, why are you going to use Realm anyway? You said you don't use Realm because you're afraid of using her ability and lock up the game. But Sketch, every single time I've used Sketch, it just hasn't resulted in anything great. Strago he's a blue mage, but the blue magic abilities aren't as effective as they are in other games because, once again, everyone can learn Ultima. So when you look at Final Fantasy V and the blue mage abilities there, and just how it's essentially a game-breaking bug if you know how to manipulate your blue mage, Strago isn't that. Setzer is great because the slots ability is pretty much an all-party attack all the time. So I usually have Setzer in, but sometimes he can kill you too with that. So you don't want that. Cyan takes forever to load up his sword tech. And so, like, even when he gets to the ability, he has a level 8 ability, you're sitting there and you're vulnerable for like multiple turns. So, like, when you really comes down to what abilities are useful or not, especially before Ultima becomes an option or the magic system like really breaks wide open, the game almost is telling you like these certain characters are really going to drive your party if you want to win. And the only way that you're going to have a balanced experience is if you handicap yourself. And that is one of the least favorite things I like doing in any video game, is deliberately making it harder for myself. I think that's bad. I think that's bad design. And that's where I just think that the gameplay fails. It's not the worst. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying is it keeps it from really being amongst the best because it is so ridiculously broken, and not in the Final Fantasy VIII fun way, where like when you know how to break it, it can be broken and it's fun, or the Final Fantasy V way, which is the same thing. Once you learn the job systems, you can break it wide open, and it's goofy and it's giggle inducing how bonkers you can just destroy enemies without like really thinking about it. And here it's just kind of like, hey, you know the ability, go do it, use the drill, use the chainsaw, battle over, hooray, or cast Ultima twice, yeah, you're amazing, you're doing good stuff. And it's like it's boring now, and I feel bad about it, but it could be much worse because it still has the active time battle, still moves really fast, still moves really fluidly, and is still rewarding because at the end of the day, I mean, the Final Fantasy battle system, starting with Final Fantasy 4 through 9, is probably some of the best in RPGs, period. So, yes, am I complaining? Absolutely. I think it's one of its shortfalls. You're damn right. But at the same time, like, it's still good. It's unfortunate the direction they chose to take. Shane, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really necessarily disagree with anything you're saying. It feels very, while we heaped a lot of praise and like insight on to the plot, and justifiably so, to use the parlance of the children these days, the combat in this to me just is kind of mid, I guess. Like it's there,
yeah.
You know, like it's not bad, but it's kind of what you would expect, especially at this point in the series. You're at the 6th entry, so it's just like, yeah, okay, like this sure is ATB. All right, cool. And it does some neat things, you know, as Rick mentioned, but by and large, yeah, it's just kind of, it's there. And I think the funny thing is, because there's what, like 14 characters, is that the total eventually, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Having 14 different party members and trying to make them all feel unique and have them all well balanced is not an easy task. And as you sort of pointed out, it may not have necessarily been nailed. So this is a thing that I always come back to, because it's funny, because both of you said you're the type of player where you don't like to keep one party composition and you like to swap it up constantly. I absolutely despise that kind of gameplay. I am the polar opposite, where the single thing, like the prime directive that I have in an RPG is I just want to find a group of characters that I like, that work well together, and stick with it for the whole game. Like the uncertainty of like, oh, well, maybe I should swap this character in. And well, if they're better, then did I just waste all my time? Like that, I hate that. It feels so bad to me. And so having 14 different characters to choose from, to me, is not like a plus. You know, it's like okay, you probably didn't need to do this. Like maybe you could have pared that down by half and spent more time making sure that each of those characters was balanced well and were equally useful, et cetera, you know?
See, I have a slight disagreement. Because I think that the way they did in Final Fantasy VI, I think you're right. I think they didn't really have a well thought out process with how to balance character skills. I think their primary focus was on the story,
Right?
Which is what we discussed in like the brief history, which was the entire concept of how they were going to make this game. Is they like, hey, here are the characters, how we're going to intermingle this, and it sounds like what those characters did and how they interacted in the battle system was secondary. What made them unique was secondary.
Mm-hmm.
But can you do a game where 14 characters are unique and each have a ability that they can contribute and each have value in terms of what your battle system is? I think you can absolutely do that. They just didn't.
well, I'm not saying you can't do it. No, I'm actually I'm agreeing with you. Like they just didn't. They didn't. But my point is, if they didn't, why have that many characters in the first place? Right? Like if you're not going to take that time, and yes, I get it. The narrative was the focus, and that's great. And I love a good narrative in a game, but if you have to have the gameplay, that's the other half of the deal. That's what we're coming into this. It is a game, not a movie. And so if that's the case, then why even have that many characters to choose from for your party at all? Like if you're not going to put in the legwork, then cut that shit down and just focus in. It's kind of the same argument that I've had in past episodes about how actually I talked about this in Okami. It's the same argument, just not with party members. It's with overall length of the game. Just focus. For fuck's sake, just focus. Like focus on a smaller, narrower subset and just really make that shine. That's why a lot of my experiences with games, the ones that always, or not always, but generally will stand out to me or stick out to me, are the ones that are not sprawling open world experiences with hundreds of hours of potential emergent gameplay, which frankly I think is just a buzzwordy excuse for, I don't know, we just made this world and filled it with bullshit. But that's another discussion for another day. But just focusing down on, okay, this is what really matters. Let's just take this, a manageable subset, and just make this the best it can be. And I feel like that would have been a better approach than being like, no, let's just have like 14 friggin' characters to choose from over the course of this game, but we're not going to take the time to necessarily, do the due diligence of going through and doing all of the balancing and making sure that each of these characters, regardless of what they choose, are going to, function appreciably well. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think one of the reasons that they did have those 14 characters going back to like Final Fantasy V, and 4, but I'm going to stick more with 5, 4, and 3 specifically, is because when you really get down to it, each of those characters do have a job. Some of them are new jobs, like Edgar is a machinist, which is not a thing, but everything has a character class. Like Locke's a thief. They're like, well, you need your thief because the thief is in every Final Fantasy, so you need to have that. Terra is your black mage, which is Celeste is more of your red mage. They're not really typical proto classes, but they have their class. Strago, blue mage. Umaro is your berserker. Gogo is your mimic. I guess Gao is also a berserker. They have 2 berserkers. I really like Gao, by the way, for gameplay. He's also broken once you get Stray Cat. Not like worst kept secret. But I think that has a lot to do with it. But there's also the fact that, going back, once again, mentioning the development, when you're taking inputs from all of your team members and giving them the opportunity to create characters. And I think by this point, a lot of them were staff that had been on since Final Fantasy IV through the Super Nintendo development process. Like, this is kind of a reward for your team and saying, hey, you can all be part of this in some way, give your characters and we can put them in here. And that's probably what happened. That's probably why all the characters aren't created equal, even though they're narratively strong, because maybe they're like, yeah, I like this character more. It's just going to be more powerful. At the end of the day, I'm not sure, but I 100% agree with you. And that's another reason why Final Fantasy IV is one of my more favorite games. It's my favorite Final Fantasy game, is because it's so focused in what character abilities are and how balanced it is, which does not exist in here whatsoever.
Right.
So let's move on to something that back in the positive, I do believe. We'll see. The graphics. What do we think about how this game performs in terms of its visuals? I will lead this one off and say it's fucking beautiful. I don't know what else to say. I think that the Super Nintendo version actually, in terms of its pixel art, in terms of its visual presentation, it looks better than the Pixel Remaster. I like the look of it better than the Pixel Remaster. I think this is the height of 16-bit video game design in terms of its aesthetic, in terms of the colors that it has, the way that it presents itself to the player. Are the character models as good as, say, Chrono Trigger, which also made by Squaresoft like a year later? No, but that's a different visual presentation. They were staying in line with what Final Fantasy had been up till that point, starting at 1, in terms of how the character models are designed. The enemy sprites are brilliant. The world map looks fantastic for a Super Nintendo game. The attention to detail on every single building within a town looks great. The spell effects are the best out of any game on the Super Nintendo. It's a visual tour de force. And I think Final Fantasy VI is, you're looking for an example of how an RPG can look good on the Super Nintendo, because back then RPGs were not known for being standouts in the graphics department. Final Fantasy VI sure as shit is. And this kind of is counteractive to the belief that when Final Fantasy VII launched, that's all of a sudden when all RPGs just wanted to be graphics whores. No, shut up. Final Fantasy VI is the height of graphical fidelity for the Super Nintendo, and that's one of its selling points, I'm sure, from Squaresoft as well, because that's what they always wanted to do. They wanted to deliver on the highest graphical possibility, and that is achieved here for all intents and purposes. I want to know if anyone feels differently about that. I'm sure there's some nuance here, and this is a podcast, and we all have microphones, so we'll have that. But Rick, do you have any different takes on this one?
I'm right there with you, man. I really am. I mean, look, Final Fantasy 16 is a beautiful game visually. It looks phenomenal. I can really appreciate the craft of these sort of realistic style games, but I am always going to appreciate art direction over graphical fidelity. I feel like a broken record. I say it all the time. I will always prefer something like Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger. Iconic. And Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, I mean, those are two of the best looking games on the system, I think. Absolutely phenomenal. It's the limitations of the system. This idea that there's an idea that I used to use when I was teaching like beginner jazz to classical musicians, where you impose limits on yourself to encourage creativity. And I think it works great. And, they were basically forced to do that on these systems back then. The systems can only do so much, so they have to get creative with how they're interpreting things. And as such, we get really creative art direction and really creative, expressive sprites. That's why this game reminds me so much of theater, is because of how expressive the sprites are. just looking at the camera, doing the little finger wags, the peace signs. Like when they get excited or scared, Locke will jump in the air and his like eyes bulge out. And he does like a little scream. It's brilliant. It's just great. So good. So good. And holds up, you know, through no fault of 7. It holds up so much better than, you know, 7 does to this day.
Shane, what's your thoughts on the visuals for Final Fantasy VI?
I'm not entirely sure that I can really add too much more that's going to be meaningful than what the both of you have already said. Yeah, I mean the pixel artwork in this is fantastic. I mean, I'm probably going to say this again when we get around to the end of the show, but there's a reason that a lot of folks consider Final Fantasy VI to kind of be like the blueprint for a lot of RPGs of this style, like going forward, as sort of like this watershed moment, I suppose, in the RPG space. And I think that this is a big part of it. It's funny because I think, if I recall correctly, given that this was sort of like the last 2D entry, to me, it almost feels somewhat similar to what we said about FF9 back when we had that episode, where FF9 was very much like the sort of the culmination, like the greatest hits of everything that, you know, that team had learned over the course of the Final Fantasy series, and kind of putting that all together. I kind of feel like this is very similar in that way, in that this was kind of like the culmination of, you know, the 2D sprite based Final Fantasy RPG. Though it's not necessarily, well, it just isn't the first game to really leverage Mode 7 graphics. It definitely used them more extensively than a lot of other games prior. And having like the world map rendered in Mode 7 is really cool. Like, I'm always a sucker for good Mode 7 implementation. I remember, and honestly, it's very nostalgia based, but I mean, go figure, we're a retro video game podcast. It's what we literally live on. So, but it is very much that, because I remember playing the Super Nintendo back when I was a kid, and just having that like extra dimensionality to the game, even though it's not really like a true 3D in the strictest sense, was just such a big deal. Like, I mean, even stuff like, you know, when we talked about Contra 3, and even though those overhead levels kind of suck balls, but I mean, having that Mode 7 stuff in there is just so cool. And it's the same here, you know, so having that like sort of pseudo 3-dimensional perspective is really awesome. And because of the, you know, extra horsepower that you're working with here, having the fully detailed sprites, even on like the map and everything, which they couldn't necessarily do in previous entries, sort of lending to that expressiveness that Rick was talking about. Yeah, the game looks great.
Let's keep this great train rolling, because I don't think it's going to stop when we start talking about this game's music, which once again was composed by the great Nobuo. I have always been able to say his name, by the way, and all of a sudden now I have this major problem. Nobuo Uematsu, the legend himself. Many consider him to be the best composer of all time in the video game music realm, and this is a shining example of why that is. Rick, I'm gonna let you go last on this because of your history with music, because I'm sure you're going to. You had some great musical examples earlier in the show, so if you say them again, then I'm here for it. I'm just gonna sit here and just like listen lovingly, but I'm just gonna get my thoughts out of the way here first and kick it over to Shane next. The music is damn near perfect. This isn't my favorite music in the series. My favorite, or what I consider to be the best Final Fantasy soundtrack, is 8. And then I think this is second. I think it's second. I would need to go through, because that's second. 8's my favorite in the franchise, but this is really damn close. This is definitely the best out of the Super Nintendo trilogy. I know there are people who love 4, but I think that just the outstanding sound quality that is present within every single track, the example of leitmotifs that are used, the fucking dancing mad, the final boss theme is insane, and the ending theme is incredible. It's such an emotionally expressive song that captures all the characters and their identity. This is definitely my favorite soundtrack on the Super Nintendo. It's close. I would have to go back, but I hope I didn't put this on my top 5 soundtracks of all time. I hopefully didn't put a Super Nintendo soundtrack on there, because then I'm going to sound like shit. I know did I? What was my number 5? Donkey Kong Country 2. Shit. Or Donkey Kong Country. Yeah, I think that one is slightly better. Yeah, I'm just saying that so I can have continuity. But this is a fantastic soundtrack. Shane, I'm bailing.
Yeah, there you go. Quick. Bail before anybody notices. I mean, dude, honestly, I'm at a loss for words. Like, I don't know what to say about this. It's fucking great. Like, all of the tracks are fantastic. I would expect them to be. I mean, the thing, and I think Rick was talking about this a little while back, but this was more about, I suppose, like the graphical presentation of like the intro, and but you do get that same sort of feeling from even just right from the title screen. Typically, right, you would expect very sort of like high fantasy, like sort of like we're leading into adventure, either that or more of like I want to say almost like an ethereal sort of vibe, right? Lots of bells and shit like that. And you don't get that. Like right off the bat, you're just hit with like some minor chord, like doomy shit. It's just like, no, this game is serious. And it starts that way, but then it kind of like, you know, if you let it run, it eventually goes more into that sort of lighthearted, like the sort of vibe you'd expect from a Final Fantasy game. But it doesn't get there right off the bat. Like it opens almost harshly in a way, which I think is apropos, and that's just one example. I mean, you already said Dancing Mad. I mean, it's the obvious one, but it's for a good fucking reason, right? It's a great track. So I really don't have much more to add to that. And also, I'm about to be followed up by an actual person who knows things about music. So I feel like he's going to have way more intelligent things to say about this. So Rick, why don't you go ahead and take it?
I mean, I'm going to keep this on the level that you guys are, man. I mean, this soundtrack is amazing. I mean, Chris, you mentioned Uematsu being considered one of the greatest. I mean, yeah, him, Yasunori Mitsuda, and Yoko Shimomura are 3 of the all-time great JRPG composers. Certainly there are more, but I mean, when I think JRPG, that's where my mind goes. With apologies to Shoji Meguro, whose music I also love. But I mean, this soundtrack is some of the best that this series has to offer. It is incredible to me that he was able to put out this 7, 8, and 9 all in a row. I think I read somewhere that Uematsu said that like he thought this would be the final one that he was going to do, the Final Fantasy, and you know, so he was like, I put everything into it. And then 7 happened, and then 8, which like, geez, talk about some of the greatest soundtracks in the series. 8 is, oh my God, it's just incredible. Zozo, the town of Zozo, one of my favorite Final Fantasy tracks of all time. Locke's theme, beautiful. Terra's theme. There are a couple of iterations of Terra's theme in here, but the one on the world map that's used for the world map, to me, that is like if somebody said, hey, what is like the quintessential JRPG adventure theme? It's that. It's the world map Terrace theme. It is that. And you can kind of hear him take inspiration from that in Lost Odyssey's theme too, where it's like, you know, it has the sense of adventure, this driving force with the snare drum ostinato and the melody, the contour of it being played by a flute is just so searching. It makes you, it's not sad, but it's like, it's continually moving forward, like it's looking for the next destination. It's hopeful. It's full of wonder. I love it. I adore it. And then, of course, Chris, you alluded to this. Uematsu's crowning achievement, Dancing Mad.
100%.
In the Final Fantasy series. I mean, oh my goodness. Talk about what an amazing track. 17 minutes. practically unheard of for video games at the time. And even today, I mean, you're at the final battle. You're fighting Kefka, who has become a corrupted, distorted god, and you're essentially ascending this twisted and a bizarro Tower of Babel. But instead of searching for God for answers and to find enlightenment, you're climbing to take down this false demiurge that has taken hold of everything. As you're going up, Kefka's original theme comes in and it morphs into this sort of prog rock thing, that Uematsu is so famous for. Everybody check out the Black Mages version of this, his rock band. Oh my God. It is something special. It's like Dream Theater meets Final Fantasy. Amazing. But, as you're going up, you're going through these four different iterations of Kefka. And as you rise, it mirrors these classical style paintings of hell that I was trying to find the artist, but I just couldn't. But it mirrors that. You have this imagery of sort of like the 7 layers, the 7 circles of hell. You have Kefka being depicted as a sort of beast up until his final form as a twisted golden god. And as you're going up, yes, the music is prog rock, but it becomes irreverent, and there's an organ interlude, sort of like a Bach partita. It feels very reverential and holy while you're looking at this twisted version of Kefka, who has become a god of corruption, a god of fear, and a god of tyranny, of madness. And it's perfect. It's this juxtaposition that is so amazing, and Uematsu is like the only one that could do it. I mean, not really, but like he's the master at this. It's beautiful. That's actually my favorite part of Dancing Mad, is the part that goes into a sort of organ cantabile or a prelude. It is so juxtaposed by the twisted, disgusting fiend that we see that we're taking down. I don't know, man. Like I can't like the more I go on, I get like choked up thinking about it. It is a masterpiece.
That's how music is extraordinarily powerful, when you can get choked up just thinking about how it's built and how strongly that music can make you feel, and how much talent and care and passion went into designing that. And that's incredible. And I have to agree with you too on that Dancing Mad piece. I think it's the second to last form. Wish I could just describe it as well as you did, when it goes to straight organ, and it's just, if I knew musical terms, I wish I could express it. It was like dun, 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 ba, da, 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 dun, 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 dun. You know what I'm talking about. It's going to sound, sorry listener, that I've just tried to horribly express that part. It has a flavor to it that is, we said earlier, in terms of the story, it subverts your expectations, because up to this point, Final Fantasy had a more fantastical fantasy feel to it. Not universally, of course, but he struck such a different theming here, and captured so many different areas. He's done it before, but like you have this very cathedral type music, which I'm sure there's a definition for. He has the fantasy music. He has that overworld theme. He has ragtime in here when you go to the Colosseum, which from what I understand is probably damn near plagiarized if you look hard enough.
Oh, wait, really?
But like, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I would have to look it up. There's one of these songs like has a almost 1-for-1 version out there. I think it's the one at the Coliseum when you go into. And then you have like the Velt, which maybe you may not like the theme. I don't like it because I don't like the Velt. But like the entirely different feelings and atmosphere and temperature of every single track in this score is present, but it still all comes together, and it still feels like one cohesive track, and it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and I don't think there's much more we can really say unless Shane wants to say more here.
Just like throw that one back over. No, honestly, I think
It's just in case. I just don't want to cut it off there.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, but no, I think we've covered it pretty well.
And the sound is iconic too because of Kefka's laugh. I'll just say that.
What?
Great.
What? The man who uses it as a phone notification? Crazy.
I do. It's my text message notification, of course.
That's great.
But at this time, it's time to move into the Patreon petifications. And we have like 15 of them this time. There's so many of you that wrote in for this one. Thank you. If you want to share your Patreon petification, all you got to do is go over to Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. It's just $1. And then head over to our Discord and you'll find a section called Patreon petifications. We'll be like, hey, talk about this game for the next episode. And we will read it. We're going to read all 15 this time. It's going to take us forever. But you know what? We do this because you support us. And thank you. Thank you for all the support you do provide to us. Even if you're just listening, thank you. I don't want to make it sound like if you're not a patron, you're not important. We love all of you. But because you do donate, a little bit of your hard-earned money to us and you give us your opinions, we're reading all of them. And there's a lot of them. So we're going to kick this off, starting with Randall, who was actually quite angry with me when I posted the notification. And you can tell by the way he says it because Randall says, it's midnight, you heathen, because I put an @patron notification Discord. Final Fantasy VI has the coolest mechs in Final Fantasy. There, pontificated. Thank you, Randall.
Man, all those flavors, and you chose to be salty. All right. Moving right along, we have Alt, who says Final Fantasy VI is like the Final Fantasy VII, but for Gen Xers / elder millennials. If you could read when it released, it was probably one of your favorite games. I couldn't. Final Fantasy IX is my Final Fantasy VII. That said, this game felt different from the other Final Fantasy games at the time. The color palette felt more muted, the story felt more mature, and the cast is enormous. That is true. Kefka is a great villain that I would have loved more scene time with compared to Ultros. Kefka's final boss theme is an amazing accomplishment in early gaming years, and while it's not my favorite, it's still in the upper echelon of Final Fantasy games.
Oh my God,
Right.
we didn't talk about Ultros.
We did not.
I love Ultros. He's great. I love him. Don't burn the octopus, kids. Which we did. Rick, you want to read the next one?
This comes from Dischimera from Game Over Hell. Here's what they have to say. Final Fantasy VI was my first contact with the series. I remember being very intimidated by the pace of the ATB system when my parents rented it. I didn't actually go deep into the game until emulating it on my dad's PC back when. I know a lot more about the game than I should, considering I never beat it. If I had to rank the series, 6 would be right behind 9. It's not perfect, with its flaws being something haters love to point out more and more over the years, as if that ruins the whole game. But the music direction, the serious dark tone, which 16's writing team surely could have learned something from. Nice. That pretty much lasts until the very end, and cast of characters that often share the role of protagonist make this one still really stand out. And it's unfortunate poor small indie company Square Enix is incapable of going forward with a remake that it deserves without taking about 15-year dev cycles.
I don't want a remake.
Yeah, here.
I don't want it. I'm sorry we disagree with that, Discamera. That small poor indie team at Square Enix can still continue not to find a way to do it. Next is from Ray the Quiet Turtler, who says, I love Final Fantasy IV, and it will forever hold a place in my pantheon of gaming. Final Fantasy VI, however, was the first JRPG that I played where it felt extravagant right from the start. The stakes were high from the beginning, and there was some sense of anxiety almost immediately on where the story was going to go. If someone says Kefka is their favorite villain in video games, I won't deny them of that claim. His character really has no redeeming traits. It's the first time really for me where the story feels demoralizing halfway through, and it was a new feeling for me as a gamer.
And the comeback trail for the heroes of the story was honestly pretty great, backed by Nobuo Uematsu's ultimate track of hope, Searching for Friends. It's almost like the two stories in the opposite spectrum in this game, and it really landed for me. The cast is even larger than Final Fantasy IV, and it was great getting to know all of their backstories. The enjoyable stuff I knew from 4, Moogles, airships, chocobos, etc., returned, and I love that. At times, you have to play multiple parties to get the job done. And of course, the Esper system was fun to mess around with as well. Though, honestly, you can really break the game doing that. Soundtrack is also an old-timer. Final Fantasy VI is memorable as all hell. And if 7 can get a huge overhaul and a remake, why not 6, right?
Seems like there's really a push for that remake. I don't know.
Hey, who am I to say it shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Shane?
All right. Well, next up, we have Matt, aka Stormageddon, and they say, I have, to this day, never finished Final Fantasy VI. I was playing on Steam many years ago and got to when the world ended, but my save file got corrupted and I lost everything. Oof, that's harsh.
Oh, man.
I loved what I played of it and have always wanted to go back. With the Pixel remasters on Switch and having played FF4 just last year and loving it, I feel like it's only a matter of time till I got back to it and finished it.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
That's rough.
Yeah, that is. On Steam, too. That's weird.
Yeah, that is unusual. I don't think I've ever had that happen. Although that does remind me of that time that I was playing Nier and my Xbox 360 hard drive died. That was fun. But anyway.
Not from the game either.
Yeah, no, not intentionally.
Next up, we have got Saxbit. What a great name. They've got a long one. Here's what they say. Final Fantasy VI is a timeless masterpiece, and it will forever hold a special place in my heart as both the very first RPG I ever played and my favorite in the series. I was almost ruined for RPGs because of watching my best friend, shout out to Justin Crosby. I think we could all say shout out to Justin Crosby. God bless him. Play Final
Shout
Fantasy.
out to Justin Crosby.
Play Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is straight up hot garbage. I just assumed all RPGs were equally as bad. However, a short time later, I watched him play Final Fantasy VI, and I was enamored. Justin was borrowing the SNES cart from another guy in the neighborhood, so I made arrangements with the owner to borrow it after Justin was done. Knowing that this game was my first RPG, Justin advised me to borrow the official strategy guide as well, which I did. This ended up being helpful in more ways than one. My parents limited my gaming time to 1 measly hour per day around this time period, so I stayed up late at night combing through the strategy guide and plotting how I'd use my hour that next day. In any case, completing this game was a truly special experience, and I had to do it, and I had to own it for myself. That summer, I got it for my birthday. And thank God I did too. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. I had surgery on my balls that summer, so I could do very little other than play video games. LMAO. Yeah, same. Since owning it, I've played through the game numerous times, mostly on the SNES, but also on the GBA to a lesser extent. I do understand that it's a flawed game. There are glitches galore, such as vanish/cross zone, realm sketch glitch, and etc. And it's a common complaint that the Esper and Magicite system homogenizes characters towards the end of the game. Personally, I don't care. The Esper system is still my favorite RPG magic system. I'm not enough of a dumbass to risk crashing my game with realm sketch glitch, and there are too many other amazing things about this game to get hung up on the stupid things. The story is amazing, the characters are compelling, and the music makes me believe that Nobuo Uematsu is Asian Jesus. Damn, love this game.
Very well said, Saxbit.
It's a way with words.
I hope your balls are much better. We didn't mean to laugh. Well, I mean, you did, but I don't know where I'm going with this. It's time to move on to Backlog Adam. Speaking of balls, Backlog Adam from The Good, the Bad, and the Backlog says, I still haven't finished it. Maybe one day. It didn't grab me. He did edit and says, I do have specific memories of playing it on PS1 as part of the Final Fantasy Anthology release because of the original Super Nintendo version wasn't released in Australia. That's true. It only came out in Japan and the United States. I remember playing it when I was homesick from school, and it was kind of a fever dream, which may have been a hindrance to me getting into it. Thank you, Adam.
All right. Moving right along the list. Oh, we got another chunky one here. All right, this is from Captain N. Says Final Fantasy VI or 3, as we in the North Americas know it as, is a wonderful game featuring the best story in the Final Fantasy series, along with the best antagonist in pretty much all of the video game universe. This game took me right away with its opening, laying the groundwork for what was to come. The mid-game shift and a major event that set the ending in motion leaves you a vast new world to explore, with many things and characters to find. Most of all, the 14 characters you could find and use all had interesting stories about them. The fact that they used them all for the final battle was amazing. If this is a spoiler, too bad, the game is 30 years old. If there are two things I think the game could have done better, it would be making more multi-party dungeons once you obtain enough characters. This would have promoted leveling up the whole party. Second would be to make the branch that happens earlier either a longer affair or happen with sending two parties in two directions. It could have been expanded upon. In conclusion, Final Fantasy VI is a great game in any form and should be played by all JRPG lovers.
Well said, Captain N. And Captain N is part of the Retrotopia podcast. Go check them out.
Next up, friend of the show and friend of many shows, Masked Keaton. Here's what Keaton has to say. Everything I could say has already been said more eloquently by other patrons and the hosts, so I will point out that the fact wearing the Moogle suit turned that character sprite into a Moogle freaked me out at first. I thought my game glitched. Then I thought it was super cool. Did FF6 make me a furry?
The world may never know.
Possible. All right, next is FF Cottage. And Cottage says, I don't care for Final Fantasy VI. I don't dislike it or despise it. However, despite numerous attempts to get through the game, I can't seem to be captivated like others have. In such scenarios as these, the outsider sees the subject as a nostalgic idol and or communal icon all acolytes must worship. Many Final Fantasy games get this treatment, and 6 is amongst the most beloved. Just not by me. Sorry you don't like it, Cottage.
I do appreciate that we have a dissenting opinion, though. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, you need at least one, right?
Yeah. All right. We have, I'm glad this worked out this way. I get to read Lyle's, the patron saint of the show and very good friend of mine. And he says, I played FF6 on my GBA SP. Hey, so did I. Just a few years ago. I think my hands still hurt, and it was so very worth it. I'd come from playing 5 and 4, and this game felt more mature and serious. The heroes more heroic, and the villains less mustache twirling. I remember my horror and amazement when I realized, the crystals are people? FF5 was almost purely a systems game, and so one might have expected 6 to whiplash and be a pure story game, and while its story is amazing, its systems aren't lacking either. Thank you, Lyle.
Thanks, Lyle. Makes a good point about how, the crystals, which were a central point in Final Fantasies up to this point, they're espers. They're essentially people. They're displayed with human emotions and human capabilities because for all intents and purposes they are, and that's why you have a half esper as part of your party. They can intermingle and reproduce. There's even a scene that very much indicates that. So, yes, the crystals are people.
Soylent crystals.
There you go.
Next up, we have Jenny E. Jenny says, Final Fantasy VI taught me a profound lesson. Sometimes the bad guy wins. The world of ruin, Leo's death, the Esper's sacrifice. Not everything can be fixed by the heroes, and the world is just worse off. Beautifully said.
Very much so. Jenny E is a very good writer. If you are in our Discord, you know that she has a series of pieces that she writes. Note that the series that was most popular, I find, in our Discord was The Theme of Love, but she has things called Drabble right now, and go check that out. She's a very good writer. Next is MQ Keith from the Late Great Main Quest podcast. And Keith says Final Fantasy VI is the best game I've tried to finish 4 or 5 times. The first time I played it was around 1997 or 98, and I just couldn't get pulled into the world like I had with previous games in the genre. Since then, over the past 25 years, I've tried to see it through to the end, but I just get incredibly bored. The cast is way too bloated, so many of the characters are more on the shallow side than I like from a Final Fantasy, and the game has a ton of pacing issues. especially once you hit the world of ruin. It's just a slog in my opinion and could really benefit from cutting some fat. With that said, the game does have one of the best stories in the series, and it still is, a showpiece for the Super Nintendo. Although the systems aren't as deep as the games before it, the refinement is something I think that the game excels at. I just think they could have refined the game in a few other areas before pushing it out the door. Thank you, Keith.
All right, next up we have Tony G, who says, while FF7 was my first Final Fantasy game, FF6 was the game that made me really like JRPGs. It somehow manages to pack in every JRPG trope, but is not corny and has a great story. The characters are all diverse and have their own abilities. I also appreciate the villain. He's not some damaged child who is scorned by the world. No. He is a mass murdering fuck clown who blows up the world. A great role model for the young baby dick dragons of tomorrow. Also, as a teenager, I killed Shadow by just leaving because the game said to. I was sad when my friends told me I am a ninja-less fucking loser. Thank you, Tony.
Gotta wait for Shadow.
Next up, we have Real Dave Jackson from Tales from the Backlog. Here's what Dave says. Final Fantasy VI was my first Final Fantasy game, and having played it 3 or 4 times now, it's still one of my 2 favorites. I love how Uematsu word. I love how differentiated the character skills are and how those skills reinforce who they are as characters. I love how the story takes unexpected turns, leaving the group to pick up the pieces and find a reason to persevere. And I think this is one of Uematsu's best works, working with the limitations of what sounds an SNES could produce. There are critiques to be had about the combat and customization, but that's pretty far down the list of things that come into mind when I pontificate about Final Fantasy VI. It will always be one of my favorites.
Well said, Dave. All right, Lunchbox, aka the Disgruntled Gamer, states, finally, the best Final Fantasy of all time is getting an episode. Yes, you heard that correctly, all you emo weebs who thinks that Final Fantasy VII is the best. You're wrong, just accept it. Oh, that was rude. I played this when it launched on the Super Nintendo. No. Now I played this when it launched on the Super Nintendo. I was in high school and holy shit, it was glorious. This is among a handful of other RPGs that released for the Super Nintendo and has cemented this console as my favorite console of all time. I mean, come on. You have Sabin who can bench press a train, a ninja who never talks. You can get a Yeti in your party as well, while optional is frigging cool because he is pure brute strength. Not to mention a nod to Star Wars at the beginning. Plus it has Kefka, which is undoubtedly the best villain of all time. He just doesn't give a shit. He destroyed the world and becomes a god. The game needs a remake treatment, Square. Get your shit together. Anyways, I'm rambling. In conclusion, this game is really fucking good. Play it, love it, and be sure to get all 3 ribbons throughout the game. It'll benefit you for the end game. Thank you, Lunchbox.
Whew. We made it.
We did make it. I was trying to think of something to say, but you know what? I definitely see his perspective. I was like, yes, I completely get that. Now it's time for our turn to say what we think overall about this game as to whether or not it holds up today. As is tradition, myself and Shane will go first. I'll allow Shane to start out about whether or not he thinks the game is held up today, and our guest will have the final word as to where this game is in the overall pantheon of holding up. So, Shane, does this game hold up today?
Well, you know, there are plenty of times over the life of this show where I said I'm going to be brief and then I don't. So I'm going to try to not do that this time and just say, despite some of the things that I might have said earlier about maybe the cast of characters being a little too big, and I do happen to agree with some of the sentiments where maybe some things, as far as pacing is concerned, could have been a little tighter. Other than that, yeah, it holds up. It's great. Just go play it. It's good. Done. There you go. Next.
All right. Thanks, Shane. That was brief and to the point. Very eloquently said, I should say. All right. So, yeah. Does this game hold up? Yes. It does hold up. I do have my issues with the gameplay, but I stated those already. If you want to go back, you can re-listen to that. But that's, I think, the only shortfall this game has. And it's probably still better than most RPGs in terms of its gameplay. So This game is the total package. I still think it's the best overall plot in the Final Fantasy series, and I think that's why most people play RPGs. Yeah, go check it out and really get in depth with it. It's a beautiful, beautiful game, and it should be experienced by as many people as possible if you consider yourself a JRPG fan. It's an essential. This is an essential. Yeah, I can understand why some people might not like the 2D style. If that's not your thing, I understand Final Fantasy's taken a very radical direction. But if you're listening to this and you haven't played it, why? We got 15 comments in our Patreon. Go out of your way, play it, and if figure out whether or not you like it, because I'm pretty sure you will. It 100% holds up. Final Fantasy VI, A+ game. Hooray! One of the greatest JRPGs ever, for sure. All right, Rick, take us home.
I'm going to echo a lot of what you two said. I mean, this is simply a masterpiece. It's a masterclass in what makes JRPGs worth your time. It's a masterclass in video game writing. It is a masterclass in presentation. It's simply terrific. It's exquisite. You owe it to yourself to play it, if only for the benefit of seeing the progression of how JRPGs have come from their humble beginnings to now. You might feel like Cottage, and it might not be for you, but I think you'll be a better person for having experienced this game. I know that sounds incredibly pretentious to say, but I stand by it. Holds up completely.
So Final Fantasy VI, the Tim Tebow of Final Fantasies.
That's a football thing.
It's been a long time since Tim Tebow was relevant. I blame myself for that one. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you all had a great time. Thank you, Rick, for stopping by and returning the favor for letting me be on your show for Final Fantasy VI. And I hope you stop by more often. This is long overdue. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, as often as you'll have me. This is, I mean, I adore this podcast. I adore both of you. For the record, I want to say I'm pretty sure I did invite Shane to you, Chris, whenever we were talking about doing this on my show. But I think you said like he was not going to have the time or something. I just wanted to let Shane know that I was thinking of him.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to work with the two of you. You both inspire me very much. And yeah, what an amazing game.
All right. Awesome. Thanks once again. Thank you once again. Before we roll out, that's not the last I'm going to hear from you, Rick. I'm going to put you on the spot. You gotta promote your show. You got to know where the people can find you. I know I've pitched it 15 times through this episode. Because I do appreciate your show as well. I think it's fantastic. It's one of the best shows on the podcasting scene. So how about you let people know where to find it?
Oh, geez. Thank you, man. Well, if you want to listen, you can find us really wherever you listen to your shows. The name is Pixel Project Radio. The pitch for the show is that we do deep dives and analyze on all of the games that we love and some that you love too. I phrase it that way because I make the show to talk about the games and the art that I love. And I think that translates into, being entertaining, or at least I hope it does. If you're looking for suggestions on where to start, we did an episode times 5. We did like 5 episodes on Final Fantasy VI, me and Chris. For one of them, my former co-host Ben was also present. I thought it went extremely well. We did recently a 5-part series on Final Fantasy IX, 1 critical essay and 4 parts walkthrough of the game with friend of the show, Eric, Papa Eric. It was an incredibly meaningful experience to me. We also did an episode on the music of Nobuo Uematsu, wherein we talk about the Black Mages for sure and Dancing Mad, as well as some of his other lesser known compositions from Lost Odyssey and Grand Blue Fantasy, which was a surprise favorite of mine by a long shot, actually. So if you want to check that out, we've also got shorter episodes and so on and such forth. But you can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. You can hang out with us on social medias, all of the good stuff. Or you could just stop by the Retro Hangover podcast server and talk to me there, because I'm fairly active there, or at least I try to be. And once again, thank you both. You have kind of helped shape how I approach this craft, as well as just being 2 cool dudes. So thank you.
Well, shit, I don't even know how to follow that up. I still think it is wild to me whenever anybody ever says that, because I still feel like we're just 2 idiots with microphones, but I do very much appreciate that. So thank you. And speaking of that, that was actually perhaps a semi unintentional segue into my contractually obligated spiel. So here we go. If you are listening to this and you have made it all the way here, because this was a little bit on the chonky side, I remember back in the day, Pepperidge Farm remembers when Chris and Shane said that when we rebooted this show way back when, that we were going to stick to an hour or an hour and a half episodes, and here we are. So if this is your first time and you are still here, then hey, hello, hi, we're glad that you're here. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. And, you know, if you liked what you heard, then boy, do we have a lot of other stuff for you. There's a big backlog, not quite as big as my Steam backlog, but it's getting there as long as I stop buying games on sale. So we'll see how that goes. But
won't happen.
Yeah, probably not. It's an arms race, frankly, but you should go check that stuff out because there's a lot of great content just sitting there waiting for you, just to fill your ear holes, to, you know, block out the silence when you're sitting by yourself, you know, or what have you. And so you can find that as well as all of our other stuff, whether that happens to be our socials or the aforementioned Discord, where you can jump in and join the conversation, as well as participate in some fun monthly events and things like that, even win prizes. Ooh, ah. Let's see, what else do we got? We also have the Twitch, which Chris, speaking of obligations, is going to tell you a little about in just a moment. And lots of cool stuff. It's all in one place. We did that for you, is what I'm saying. So you're welcome. It's all at Linktree. So just go to Linktree/Retro Hangover. That's linktr.ee/Retro Hangover. It's all right there. It's so easy. Even a caveman can do it. Speaking of references that people probably don't get anymore. So Chris, what are we doing on Twitch television on certain nights or night of the week? What's going on? What can the people see?
Well, very briefly before I pitch the Twitch, I'm just going to say King of Games 96 is only a limited more amount of time before you can get all of that stuff early before it gets over to the main feed on May. So if you're interested in hearing the King of Games 96 early, now's the time to do it. So go check that out. Back to Twitch, twitch.tv/Retro Hangover, 9 p.m. Eastern time. And that will be on a Sunday night. We stream video games for you. What do we play? A variety of stuff. You never know what you're going to play. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's shit, but the conversation is always fantastic. So if you're bored, you got nothing better to do, and you know what? Pornhub just won't activate correctly. Go check out twitch.tv/Retro Hangover, and we will be there for you. Somehow, some people say that my face is attractive, and I have, you know, a lot of fans that send me interesting stuff. So go over to twitch.tv/Retro Hangover, and we will see you there at 9 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday night. Back to you, Shane.
All right. Well, then, I suppose we are at that point with all of that now having been said. Until next time.
Play with your welcome to my barbecue joysticks.
Shane here with a quick message. You know, the one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this. It has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee. And Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.